Are you a friend of my husband from middle school? I'm sorry, but I need you to leave right now. My name is Jackson, I'm 33 years old and single. Today, I went to my friend Lucas's wedding, he works with me. Before the ceremony, someone claiming to be a relative of the bride took me to a waiting room. This man was strong and forceful. I thought the bride wanted to greet me before the ceremony, so I didn't mind. At first, I admired how polite she was, but that quickly changed to disgust. The real reason I was brought there was not to be welcomed, but to be threatened. The bride, who was in the waiting room, looked at me with a mean expression. I was shocked, but I congratulated her anyway. Congratulations on your wedding. Then, she told me to leave immediately. What? I was surprised and asked why. Her answer was rude. She said, "This is why uneducated people are so bothersome," while clicking her tongue. It seemed she was upset that I only had a high school diploma. She continued, "You don't understand, so I'll be clear. My husband and I come from an elite family, and so do the other guests. It bothers me to see someone with a middle school education here." I knew that my background was looked down upon. I understood that Lucas was well educated, and I was aware of how people might feel about my education. But I still attended Lucas's wedding because we're friends. I just wanted to celebrate his marriage. It hurt that the bride, the main guest, looked down on me so much. I asked if I could say a few words to Lucas before leaving. The bride and her relatives looked at each other and started laughing, which confused me. I asked why they were laughing when I was being serious. Then, the bride said something I never expected. "My husband invited you to the wedding, not out of friendship, but out of pity," she said, continuing to mention my troubled past. I was abandoned by my parents and raised in an orphanage, because I didn't get enough nutrition while growing up. I'm tall, but very skinny as an adult. Lucas and I went to the same school. He invited me to his wedding out of compassion for a classmate like me, who struggles to get enough to eat even now. The bride thought he was trying to help me by inviting me to the wedding. I argued that this wasn't true, but she and her family ignored me. She said, "My husband's kindness can raise his status, but I can't stand having someone who only graduated from junior high at my wedding." Lucas graduated from a prestigious university and works at a large company that makes over $100 billion a year. She continued, "You say you work for the same company as my husband, but you're just a janitor or security guard. Do you think he feels sorry for you just because you were classmates? That's ridiculous." Even though we both work for the same company, which is popular and recently went public, I know there's a difference between a junior high school graduate and a college graduate. Our company hires many talented people regardless of their education, but I understand that there is still a gap between our backgrounds. No matter why he invited me, I just wanted to congratulate Lucas. I wasn't expecting anything in return. Despite how much I tried to explain myself and share my feelings, the bride wouldn't even try to understand me. She looked at me coldly, as if I were something dirty. It felt like she was trying not to breathe the same air as me. She dismissed my sincere friendship and said, "Why would my husband care about you when you only graduated from junior high?" Not only did she refuse to let me celebrate their marriage, but she also threatened to cut me off at work. I was left speechless. Even if the company accepts junior high school graduates, she refused to accept me and wanted nothing to do with me. A male relative grabbed my breasts. "Hey, please don't be so rough," I said, trying to shake him off, but he pushed me against the wall. I felt a dull pain in my back and chest and let out a low groan. "If you understand, just leave," he said. Before he could finish, the door to the waiting room opened, and I was thrown out hard, hitting the floor. Still, I could live without congratulating Lucas. I didn't want to be locked out before the wedding, so I went to a nearby cafe to wait before joining the other guests. When the reception started, the bride spotted me in my seat. She stared at me without saying a word, then she silently mouthed, "Why are you here?" The male relative noticed me and rushed over. He grabbed my arm, trying to drag me away, but this time, he couldn't get rid of me so easily. People nearby stepped in to protect me. "What are you doing?" he shouted, looking terrified. The bride seemed anxious as well. I picked up a nearby microphone and spoke loudly to the bride, who didn't understand what had happened. "Bride, I'm sorry for being told to leave. I just wanted to attend Lucas's wedding." "What is going on?" the bride asked, confused. Lucas, who was sitting at the head table, heard us and questioned, "What did you say to Jackson?" The frightened bride, under pressure, replied, Because he only graduated from junior high, it would be a bad match for both Lucas and me. I spoke to the bride, who looked dazed. I'm sorry I didn't leave, but I'll cut off my ties with Lucas. As you wish, please forgive me for this. My words shocked everyone in the room. That means you're fired, Lucas, I declared. The hall fell silent. The bride was the first to break the silence. What do you mean, fired? Lucas looked shaken, responding, you. What the hell did you just say? Jackson is the president of my company. That's right, I started a delivery service at 16, even though I graduated from junior high school. Over 10 years, I grew the company into a major corporation. I began the service with just my bicycle, right when people started spending more time at home, and it quickly became a publicly traded company. Lucas was my friend and a coworker. He always shared his meals with me and took care of me when I was skinny. He was more than a friend, he was like a benefactor. I grew up in an orphanage until I was 15, while Lucas was adopted at 12. He was smart and quickly excelled in school, going on to a prestigious university. Even after we moved away, we kept in touch. When we started our companies, Lucas promised to study hard and support mine. When our dreams came true and Lucas got married, I was thrilled. I wanted to congratulate him more than anyone else, which is why I kept trying to attend the wedding despite the bride's objections. I didn't care that I was a junior high school graduate. I was still the president. I had the authority to fire people. It was the bride who asked me to cut off my ties with Lucas, so I kindly told her that I would do as she wished. Wait, so Lucas is really fired? She said, shocked. The bride, who had been frozen in place, muttered, if you're such a loser, I don't want you anymore. I'm ending this marriage. It's pointless if you're not elite and don't have a high income. It was shocking when she declared that she was breaking off her engagement with Lucas, who had just been fired. The crowd gasped at her words. Shut up, I'm the victim here, she yelled. The good terms we had before getting married suddenly vanished. This feels like a marriage scam. She demanded compensation from Lucas for breaking off their engagement. Lucas looked disgusted by her behavior. I quietly tapped the screaming bride on the shoulder and whispered, you're the one who's going to pay the alimony, you know. After saying that, I played a video recording from my phone on the projector in the hall. This recording was from the phone I had dropped in the bride's waiting room when a male relative grabbed me. I had pressed the record button as I was pushed against the wall, and the phone continued recording as I fell. The recording showed the bride being unfaithful with the male relative in the waiting room. After the ceremony started, I went back to the waiting room and found my phone lying in a corner. I was shocked by what I saw on the recording. I couldn't believe they would do something so disgraceful on such a sacred day as a wedding. I immediately reported this to Lucas, which meant he knew about the earlier firing incident. I wanted to reveal the bride's true nature. Lucas's relatives confronted the bride's relatives, but they denied knowing the man in the video. They refused to take responsibility for him. Later, we found out that the man with the bride was just an adulterer. He seemed nice and fun, but he was a loser who didn't even work. The bride wanted to live a glamorous life while having a boyfriend. She targeted Lucas, who was gentle and reserved, and pressured him into marrying her. She really was a terrible person. Lucas, who studied hard and had little experience with love, was kind and trusted people easily. I was relieved to help him see the bride's true character, especially since my education played a part in this. In the end, the bride had to pay $5 million for the wedding and $3 million for breaking off the engagement, totaling $8 million in debt. Of course, she was cut off from her relatives and humiliated. Her adulterous partner, scared of the debt, ran away. She ended up living alone in a rundown apartment, working day and night to pay off her debts. Thanks to her terrible actions, the friendship between Lucas and me deepened, and the company grew rapidly. Since Lucas has always wanted to get married, I think I'll join him at a matchmaking party next time. I pretended to look more upset than I felt. Sure, it hurt when he first brought up divorce, but now, seeing how foolish he was, I felt like this was the best decision. Maybe this was some kind of divine sign to move on. I signed the divorce papers and left him behind, thinking he'd regret this one day. Time would tell. Fast forward a year after our divorce. Lisa, please help me. A shabby-looking man approached me as I was heading home from work. Excuse me, who are you? I asked, genuinely not recognizing him at first. It's me, Lisa. I need your help. It was my ex-husband, though he was barely recognizable. He looked worn down, his cheeks hollow, and his clothes in bad shape. Long time, no see, I said, surprised at how much he'd changed. Please, Lisa, could you introduce me to a lawyer at your firm? I can't just do that out of the blue. Lawyers charge fees, you know, I told him. I don't have that kind of money, please help me, he pleaded. Curious and feeling a bit sorry for him, I agreed to listen to his story at a nearby cafe. Before he could say much, I asked, did that girl, Alyssa, run off? He looked shocked. How did you know? Just as I thought, when he had shown me a picture of his new girlfriend, Alyssa, I'd immediately recognized her from my school reunion. She looked exactly like a woman my classmate's son had been scammed by. At the reunion, my classmate had shared her photo, warning everyone about this young woman who was a con artist. Her name then had been Sally, though I assumed even that was fake. So you did know about Alyssa? I asked him, almost amused. Well, yes, he admitted, defeated. Then he began explaining what happened. So you really want a child that badly? I asked. Yes, since you can't give birth, what else can we do? You'll agree to the divorce, won't you? He said coldly. I pretended to look more upset than I actually felt. Sure, I'd been hurt when he first mentioned divorce, but now, seeing how foolish he was, I felt like leaving him was the right choice. It was almost as if some higher power was guiding me to do this. I signed the divorce papers and left him behind, thinking he'd regret this someday. I'd just wait and see. Fast forward a year after the divorce. Lisa, please help me. A scruffy-looking man approached me as I was heading home from work. Excuse me, who are you? I asked, genuinely not recognizing him. It's me, Lisa. I need your help. It was my ex-husband, though he was barely recognizable. His face looked hollow and he was dressed poorly. Long time, no see, I replied, surprised at how much he'd changed. Please, could you introduce me to a lawyer at your firm? I can't just do that without reason. Lawyers charge fees, you know, I said. I don't have that kind of money, please help me, he pleaded. I could tell he was having money troubles, and I felt a bit sorry for him. Out of curiosity, I agreed to listen to his story at a nearby cafe.
Dad, would you like to come live with us in our new apartment? Oh, but my son's wife thinks you shouldn't because she thinks you're an outsider. Maybe my husband influenced her. He's always controlled me. Now my son and his wife disrespect me and insult me. They're moving from their old apartment to a new one and suggested we live with them. But they called me an outsider and a bother so openly. I was speechless at how cruel they were. When I heard which condo they were buying, I was confused. Maybe it's best not to live there. Why are you acting dumb? Are you just jealous we're moving to a new place? They mocked me, saying this old house suits me and I should stay here forever. No matter how much I warned them, they never listened. I realized my husband might move out to live with our son, and I accepted it. If you want to leave this house, I won't stop you. Then 6 months later, my son and his wife came to me in tears, seeking help. I was Grace, a 48-year-old homemaker with an older husband and an adult son. I got married in my early 20s, earlier than most of my friends. At the time of my marriage, I worked in an office at a real estate company. Soon after, I discovered I was pregnant and took a leave of absence. Back then, I was happy to be carrying the child of the man I loved. My husband was thrilled about the pregnancy and very kind to me. He often checked on me to make sure I was feeling okay and urged me to take it easy and not work. Many acquaintances were concerned about us. We had met, married, and had a child in less than a year. But I was too happy every day to let them bother me. Months later, I gave birth to a healthy boy, which marked the beginning of a nightmarish time, though I had no way of knowing it then. The nightmare started shortly after I returned home from the hospital following my son's birth. My husband, who had been considerate, suddenly changed his attitude. Now that I've been doing the housework, it's your turn to work hard, he said coldly. This change made me annoyed and speechless. He instructed me to have all the housework done before he returned from outings. He stopped helping with chores or caring for our son at all. When I asked why he had changed, all I got back were sarcastic remarks and abuse. You think it's unfair. Unlike you, I work all day and am tired. That's only natural, he would say. While I understood feeling tired after work on weekdays, I expected him to help out at least on weekends. He showed no interest in our child. If I dared to criticize him for this, he verbally assaulted me. Stop nagging, and don't you dare criticize just because you stay home, you old hag, he would say. After childbirth, many men reportedly stopped seeing their wives as women. Maybe my husband was one of them. Should I try to be more feminine to win back the kind man he once was? Even though I wanted to, I was too exhausted from housework and taking care of our unfamiliar child to even think about dressing up. Eventually, my husband started staying out overnight more often, even on weekdays. He would come home smelling of women's perfume and sometimes with lipstick on his shirt collar. It seemed likely he was having an affair, but I felt powerless to confront him. I was afraid of being treated even worse if I spoke up about his behavior. Moreover, he began giving us less money for living expenses, nowhere near enough for a family of 3 to live on. Despite my protests, he wouldn't listen. Managing our household on a tight budget became my responsibility. However well I managed, it was never enough. Reluctantly, I put my son in daycare and returned to work, taking extra shifts on weekends when my husband was home to care for our son. As our son grew older and more independent, my husband suddenly started acting like a good father, even though he had previously shown no interest in childcare. It was upsetting that our son was becoming attached to him. What was worse was when our son started imitating his father's abusive language and mocking attitude towards me. Every time I reprimanded our son for his bad language, it seemed to have no effect. Instead, he would retort, "Dad said I don't have to listen to anything you say." Each time our son insulted me, my husband would just smile and pat him on the head, saying, "Good job, just like me." At this point, I thought about taking our son and divorcing my husband. Years passed, and my son became independent. I no longer needed to stay with my husband, but I had learned to ignore his presence and live life on my terms. Still wanted a divorce, but the idea of confronting him and enduring his verbal abuse again seemed like too much trouble. Amidst all this, my husband's company underwent major staff cuts, and he was laid off. Despite being unemployed, he showed no interest in finding new work and spent his days lounging around at home. He continued with his arrogant attitude as if nothing had changed, and I began to feel stressed again. When we were both working, we could avoid seeing each other at home by adjusting our schedules. However, with him always around, that became impossible. It became difficult to live while avoiding him as before, and my stress only increased. Feeling like I might lose my sanity if this continued, I seriously started considering a divorce. Sometime later, my son, who had moved out some time ago, came to visit and shared some joyful news. He wanted to marry his girlfriend, who he had brought along. I was genuinely happy for my son and blessed them. At first glance, the girlfriend seemed like an ordinary woman. However, during the meeting, which was supposed to be joyful, my husband and son continued to insult me as usual. Seeing the discomfort in the girlfriend's eyes, I felt a slight sense of relief. However, after several meetings, her attitude towards me began to sour, likely influenced by what my son had told her. I sighed and gave up on trying to become close with her. Later, my son and his wife registered their marriage and began living together in an apartment he had rented. Since their place wasn't too far from our house, they visited us now and then. After living there for a while, perhaps finding the apartment too small, they decided to move to a newly built condo. When my son and his wife visited our home to discuss their plans, I was surprised to hear the name of the condo they were considering. Before I could recover from my shock, they said something even more surprising. "Dad, won't you live with us in the brand new condo? It would be more comfortable for you." Taken aback by this sudden proposal, I inadvertently interjected, "What? What are you saying?" Then my daughter-in-law coldly glared at me and said, "Can the outsider please not interfere? We're talking to father-in-law here. Outsiders are not allowed." Being openly called an outsider by my daughter-in-law was shocking, and I was left speechless. Meanwhile, my son and his wife continued to encourage my husband to live with them, and he seemed keen on the idea. Watching them happily discuss the new home, I began to recover. Since hearing the name of the condo, I had been concerned, so I decided to speak up. "Irvin Court is a bad neighborhood. Maybe you should reconsider that condo." But no one listened to my advice. "What? Give it a rest. Stop butting in. Are you jealous because we're moving into a new condo? That's pathetic. This shabby house suits you. Live here for the rest of your life," they retorted. Once again, my words were ignored, and I realized this. Finally, I came to terms with it. If my husband wants to move out and live with them, it might be the right opportunity. Fine, if you also want to leave this house, I won't stop you. But if that's the case, could you please divorce me first? I suggested to my husband. My husband looked slightly surprised at my suggestion. Soon after, my husband smirked and agreed to the divorce immediately, signing the papers without hesitation. His nonchalant acceptance surprised me more than anything. I realized I should have divorced him sooner while he was still agreeable. I then presented him with property division waiver documents I had prepared in advance through a lawyer. This document essentially agreed not to divide any property during the divorce. My husband, thinking he had more money than me, felt it was advantageous not to divide the property, believing it would be a loss for him. Despite having an easy opportunity to gain money, he disdainfully signed the papers, as if calling me foolish for giving up such an opportunity. I held back my irritation and watched as he signed the document. Thus, our divorce was finalized, and soon after, he moved into the condominium purchased by my son and his wife. 6 months after the divorce, while I was enjoying my carefree single life, I received a call from my son. "Mom, please do something. Dad won't work, and we're struggling," he said desperately. My ex-husband had initially lived off his unemployment benefits and savings, but once those ran out, he completely depended on my son and his wife's income. No matter how much they urged him, he refused to work and only strained their finances. Although I could have predicted this, it was unexpected for my son and his wife. They had apparently planned to receive financial support from my ex-husband, who had always lied about having plenty of money. Believing his lies, they thought living with him would help with their mortgage payments, so they bought a more expensive condo than they could afford on their income alone. Instead of providing any financial support, my ex-husband only depleted their resources. Rushing to ask for my help was the outcome of their poor judgment. Hearing all this, I could only shake my head in disbelief. "That's why I told you that buying a condo was a bad idea. You didn't fully listen to me, did you?" I said. Indeed, I worked in real estate, so I knew the price of the condo they were planning to buy was not suitable for their income. I had tried to advise against the purchase because I thought they would not be able to afford the payments. Upon learning the truth that his father was not as financially secure as he had believed, my son was at a loss for words. Eventually regaining his composure, he bitterly muttered, "I can't believe Dad had so little money. And to think, Mom, how did you manage to support him with your meager earnings?" Frustrated by my son's misguided comments, I sighed again and said, "I don't know what your father told you." Then I explained my own situation. When my son was younger, I returned to work at the real estate company where I had previously been employed. Realizing there was a limit to increasing my income that way, amidst demanding days of work, household chores, and childcare, I obtained qualifications such as a licensed real estate broker and appraiser. Through gaining experience at the real estate company I eventually started my own business a few years ago. By that time, I had become accustomed to ignoring my ex-husband, who had completely disregarded me and likely didn't even notice that I had started my own business. My business grew more successfully than anticipated, and within a few years, I was earning substantially more than I did as an employee. That's why I made sure to handle the property division during our divorce. After hearing my story, my son seemed stunned on the other end of the phone. Well, that's the situation. You should also strive to live independently without relying on others, I told him. After saying this to my silent son, I hung up the phone. A few days later, surprisingly, my ex-husband and my son's family showed up at my workplace. After our divorce, I had moved out of the house we had lived in and had not disclosed my new address to them. Yet somehow, they had found out where I was. Wondering about this, it must have shown on my face because my son said, "I really wanted to see you, Mom, so I searched desperately to find you." It seemed my ex-husband, having heard about my conversation with our son, approached me with a greedy look in his eyes. "I supported you all this time. Give me something in return," he said. I couldn't help but snort at his ridiculous claim. "What are you talking about? You supported me. You never helped around the house, just belittled and ignored me." "Stop joking, please," I retorted. My ex-husband was at a loss for words. Though their visit was honestly a nuisance, it might have been fortuitously timed. Deciding to settle everything once and for all, I stepped out of the room and called a certain man, saying, "I need you to come here right now." While waiting for the person I had called, I managed to keep my ex-husband and his family in the reception room. They sat there slightly perplexed but stayed put, munching away at the snacks on the table. Were they that hard up for food? As I grew incredulous at their lack of decorum, the person I had called arrived. "Sorry to keep you waiting," said the man as he entered the reception room. It was the lawyer who served as the legal advisor for my company and had handled the paperwork during my divorce. Seeing the lawyer suddenly appear, my ex-husband and his family were taken aback. I didn't wait for their confusion to settle and quickly addressed my ex-husband. "I will be claiming property division from you." My ex-husband objected. "What property division? What are you talking about? What did I do?" As expected, my ex-husband objected, but I calmly informed him, "I won't let you forget how you treated me during our marriage." In fact, I had been keeping a record of all his mistreatments, thinking it might come in handy if we ever divorced. This included details of the verbal abuse he had hurled at me, the long hours I had to work because he wouldn't provide enough for living expenses, and evidence of his infidelity. After consulting with my lawyer with this information, I was told it was possible to claim property division, so I proceeded with it. Yet my ex-husband smirked arrogantly, claiming he had no money to pay any property division. To this declaration of unwillingness to pay, the lawyer coldly asked, "Shall we settle this in court then? We have sufficient evidence to claim property division on behalf of the lady. If you refuse, we will proceed with appropriate measures." As soon as he heard the word court, my ex-husband panicked. "Court? No, I didn't really." Eventually, perhaps out of fear of litigation, he'd agreed to pay the property division. Seeing his pitiful state, it seems my son and his wife finally saw him for what he was, desperate for money. "Mom, I'm sorry for everything up until now. We'll take good care of you from now on. Let's get along, okay?" they said, cozying up to me. It was obvious they were acting out of financial interest, and their attitude was displeasing. Even though they were my son and his wife, I decided to firmly push them away as a last act of love. "No matter what you say or do, I will not provide financial support for you in the future. Earn your own money instead of begging from someone else," I sternly told them. Upon hearing my words, my son and his wife looked disheartened and hung their heads. Later, the property division my ex-husband was ordered to pay started being deposited regularly every month. It was a small amount, so it would take time to complete the full payment, but I decided to wait patiently. Meanwhile, my ex-husband apparently started working part-time at a store. However, he seemed to be earning just enough to cover his property division and personal entertainment expenses, still depending on my son and his wife for living expenses. Continually struggling with living expenses and mortgage payments, my son and his wife eventually decided to sell the aforementioned condo because they could no longer afford the mortgage. They asked a real estate agent for an appraisal, but apparently they were not satisfied with the amount and came to me asking, "Can't you buy it at a higher price?" However, the offer amount they showed from other companies was reasonable, and I could not buy it for a higher price, so I brushed off their request. My real estate business is still progressing smoothly, and my personal life is also stress-free now that I no longer have to deal with my ex-husband or my son's family. With the time I once spent on my husband now freed up, I have more time to spend on myself. Maybe I should find a hobby, I thought. With that thought, I am living happily each day.
I always felt like I was the second choice, not the first. The spotlight was always on Anna, my older sister. She seemed to get everything effortlessly. Attention, gifts, you name it. My name is Emily, and this is how I grew up. We lived in a decent house. Dad was a mechanic, and Mom worked part-time as a cashier. Money was tight, but somehow there was always enough for Anna. I usually got what was left over. One chilly December evening stands out, setting the tone for my childhood. We were at our small dinner table. Anna was excitedly talking about a school project she aced. Mom, Dad, and my teacher praised her. Anna beamed, and my parents glowed with pride. "That's my girl," Dad said, clearly pleased. Mom nodded approvingly, saying, "We'll get you whatever you need, honey. You just keep up the good work." I poked at my food, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach. "Hey, I got an A on my math test," I mumbled, not sure why I bothered. "That's nice, Emily," Mom replied, barely glancing my way. "Make sure you keep it up." There was no praise, no excitement. It was like doing well was expected of me, or worse, like it didn't even matter. I learned early on not to expect much. Christmas was approaching, and the contrast in our living room was striking. Under the tree, beautifully wrapped gifts were piled up, all for Anna. I knew the routine. My gifts were usually things like socks or a book, nothing that felt special. That year wasn't any different. Anna excitedly tore through her presents, revealing new clothes, gadgets, and even a brand new laptop. "Oh my God, this is awesome." "Thanks, Mom and Dad," she squealed. Meanwhile, I unwrapped my own gifts, a second-hand novel and a pack of plain shirts. "Thanks," I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. After the holidays, things returned to the usual routine. Anna was the star, and I was just there. Aunt Sarah was the only one who seemed to notice. She visited occasionally, always bringing a small gift just for me, something that made me feel seen. But those visits stopped after one particularly ugly argument. I was coming home from school when I overheard them in the kitchen. "You can't keep doing this, John. You're ignoring your younger daughter," Aunt Sarah said sternly and frustrated. "She doesn't need as much as Anna," Dad retorted harshly. "That's not the point. It's about showing both your daughters that you care." "Well, maybe if Emily was more like her sister, it wouldn't be so hard," Dad replied, not realizing I was listening. Aunt Sarah noticed me first, her face dropping as she caught my eye. I ran up to my room before I heard any more, tears stinging my cheeks. After that, Aunt Sarah wasn't allowed over anymore. Dad said she was causing trouble, stirring up drama that didn't exist. But it did exist. I lived it every day. After high school, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Anna was off to college with a fat check from Mom and Dad to cover everything. Dorm, books, everything. Meanwhile, I got a pat on the back and a "good luck, Emily." Not long after that, I moved out. There were no dramatic goodbyes, just me packing my few things into old boxes and suitcases while Mom watched, her expression unreadable. I found a small apartment on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The place was shared with two other girls, Lisa and Jen, who were as broke as I was but had dreams just as big. Welcome to the dungeon. Lisa joked on the day I moved in, showing me around the cramped space with a laugh. We make it work though. You got a job lined up, starting at the diner tomorrow? She asked. Yeah, and maybe something at the bookstore part-time, I replied, dumping a box on the bed that would be mine. Good hustle. Jen nodded approvingly. We all pitch in for rent on the first, no exceptions. Okay, got it. She'd assured me. Working 2 jobs wasn't easy. The diner had me on my feet all day, taking orders and dodging the grumpy chef's temper, smiling through it all. Evenings were spent at the bookstore, shelving books and ringing up sales, the calm a stark contrast to the chaos of the diner. Months turned into a year, and saving up for college seemed like chasing a mirage. Just when I'd have a little put aside, something came up, like the time I got sick. It hit me out of nowhere. One day I was fine, the next I was burning up, barely able to get out of bed. Lisa found me like that, shivering under a pile of blankets. Jesus, Em, you look like hell, she exclaimed, her face creased with concern. You need a doctor. I can't afford a doctor, I muttered, feeling the room spin a little. We'll figure it out, she insisted, pulling out her phone. There's a clinic. They charge based on what you earn. Don't be stubborn about this. The clinic was crowded and weary, where the wait times could break you if the illness didn't. When my turn finally came, the doctor, a kind, tired-looking man, prescribed some meds and plenty of rest. You need to take it easy, he advised, handing me a prescription. Can you take some time off work? I almost laughed. Not really, but I'll see what I can do. Back at the apartment, I crunched the numbers, meds, missed shifts, just scraping by on rent. It all added up too fast. My college fund, what little there was, dwindled to nothing after the medical ordeal and draining my savings. I knew I had to face it. I needed help. Swallowing my pride, I decided to call home. It had been a while since we talked properly, since I moved out. The phone rang, and I braced myself. Mom, it's Emily. Emily? This is unexpected. Everything okay? Her voice was cautious, not warm or worried. I need to ask a favor. Can I come home for a bit, just till I get back on my feet? My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. There was a pause, the kind that tells you the answer won't be what you want to hear. Oh, Emily, you know your sister just moved back in with her husband. They're using your old room. There's really no space. My heart sank, but I pushed on. Can't we figure something out? Maybe I could sleep on the couch. It's just for a little while. Another long pause. I'm sorry, Emily. It's just not possible right now. Maybe when things settled down with Anna and the baby. I hung up and sat there, the silence of the apartment pressing down on me. They had made their choice, and I wasn't it. I was on my own, truly on my own. The next few days were a blur of applying for any job I could find, skipping meals to save a few bucks, and trying not to think about the fact that my own family had turned me away when I needed them the most. It was during one of my late-night job searches that I got a call from Aunt Sarah. Emily, sweetheart, I heard about what happened. Are you okay? Hey, Aunt Sarah. I'm managing, just trying to figure things out. Listen, why don't you come stay with me for a while? You shouldn't be alone through this. I felt tears prick at my eyes. Really? Are you sure? I don't want to impose. Of course I'm sure. You're not imposing. Your family, more than just when it's convenient. Pack your things and come over. We'll sort the rest out together. Thank you, Aunt Sarah. Thank you so much, I said, my voice thick with emotion, packing up my things again. I couldn't help but feel the weight of the rejection, but also the warmth of being welcomed without conditions. Aunt Sarah's place wasn't big, but it was filled with love, something that had been sorely missing for too long. When I arrived, Aunt Sarah was waiting at the door. She wrapped me in a big hug as soon as I stepped out of the cab. You're home now, Emily. Let's not worry about anything else tonight, she said, ushering me inside. Life at Aunt Sarah's was different from anything I'd known. It was quiet, peaceful, and most importantly, I felt wanted. A few days after I moved in, Aunt Sarah and I sat down at her old, scared kitchen table for some real talk, the morning sun spilling over the cluttered surface, turning the steam from our coffee cups into golden swirls. So, Emily, what's the plan? Aunt Sarah asked, her eyes locking onto mine with that direct, no-nonsense way she had. I took a deep breath, stirring my coffee slowly. Honestly, Aunt Sarah, I want to go to college. I want to be a lawyer. But everything's just messed up right now, I admitted. She nodded, tapping a finger on the table thoughtfully. Lawyer, huh? That's a big dream, Emily. Big dreams are good. They keep us going. But they need big plans. What's stopping you? Money, I said flatly. Money is stopping me. I can working jobs, but it's never enough, especially not for law school. Aunt Sarah leaned back, her chair creaking slightly. I might have a solution for that, but it comes with a condition. I frowned, curious and a bit wary. What kind of condition? You get into college and I'll pay for it. But Emily, you've got to commit. No half measures. You work your tail off, you study hard, and you excel. Can you do that? Her offer floored me. It was more than I could have hoped for. Yes, I can do that. I will, Aunt Sarah. Thank you. With that, we started planning. I applied to colleges that offered good law programs, crafting application letters late into the night. When the acceptance letter from a well-respected state college came, I actually pinched myself, thinking I was dreaming. I did it, Aunt Sarah. I got in. College was tough, law school even tougher. Aunt Sarah's financial support freed me from the constant stress of money, but it put another kind of pressure on me. The pressure to succeed, not just for myself, but for her too. As semesters passed, I not only met Aunt Sarah's expectations, I exceeded them. My grades were top of the class, and I landed an internship at a local law firm. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the firm, I came home to find Aunt Sarah in the kitchen, her expression more serious than usual. Sit down, Emily. We need to talk. Worry pricked at my heart as I took a seat, noticing she wasn't her usual self. What's wrong, Aunt Sarah? She sighed, a long, heavy sound. Nothing's wrong exactly. I just want you to know how proud I am of you. You've done more than I ever expected. You're going to be a great lawyer. Her praise warmed me, but her tone hinted at something unsaid. Thanks, Aunt Sarah. I couldn't have done it without you. That's not just it, she continued, her eyes serious. You've got to start thinking about what comes next. You're about to fly, and I'm just glad I could give you the wings. During my final year of law school, I managed to secure a prestigious internship at a respected law firm downtown. The first day I walked into the towering building, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My supervisor, a sharp-tongued lawyer named Mr. Coleman, met me at his office door with a skeptical look. So, you're the intern I heard so much about, Emily, right? Mr. Coleman's voice was gruff, his eyes scanning me like I was a case file he wasn't sure about. Yes, sir, I replied, determined to prove myself. I'm here to learn and contribute as much as I can. I replied, my voice steady despite the butterflies dancing in my stomach. The work was intense. I spent days buried in legal research, drafting documents, and sometimes I was allowed to sit in on client meetings, observing the real dance of law. Mr. Coleman didn't hand out praise easily, but when he did, it stuck. One late evening after everyone else had gone home, I was still at my desk poring over a particularly tough case when Mr. Coleman walked by. He stopped, looking over my shoulder at the piles of legal journals and notes spread out in front of me. Don't you ever go home, Emily? He asked, an eyebrow raised in amusement or maybe respect. Not until I figure this out, I answered without looking up. This case could set a precedent, and I think there's an angle we've missed. Mr. Coleman grunted, pulling up a chair. Show me. We spent the next hour discussing the case back and forth, with me arguing my point based on a precedent I found that could help our client. Finally, he leaned back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Not bad, Emily, not bad at all. You've got a sharp mind for this. Keep it up, and you'll make a fine lawyer. The day I graduated, I felt a mix of pride and nostalgia. Aunt Sarah was in the front row, clapping louder than anyone else, her eyes shining with tears. After the ceremony, as we walked out of the auditorium, she hugged me tight. You've done it, Emily. All those years of hard work, and here you are, she said, pulling back to look at me with that proud, unwavering support that had become my rock. I couldn't have done it without you, Aunt Sarah. You believed in me when no one else did, not even myself, I said, my own eyes misty. With my law degree in hand, I started applying for jobs. The market was competitive, brutal even, but I was not deterred. I sent out dozens of applications, went on several nerve-wracking interviews, and finally, I got a call that would start the next chapter of my life. Miss Emily, this is Jared from Mason & Associates. I'm pleased to inform you that we'd like to offer you the position. Your internship performance was highly recommended by Mr. Coleman, and we believe you'd be a great fit. I almost dropped the phone. Thank you, Jared. I'd be honored to accept. When Aunt Sarah told me that my sister Anna had never graduated college due to her early pregnancy and quick marriage, I wasn't really surprised. Aunt Sarah's health took a turn for the worse not long after that revelation. I was at work, buried in files, when I got the call from the hospital. My world stopped. I barely remember grabbing my things and rushing out. Everything after that was a blur until I reached her side. She was weak, her voice barely a whisper, but her eyes were the same, sharp and knowing. Emily, she murmured as I took her hand, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I'm here, Aunt Sarah. I'm right here, I managed to say, my voice trembling. She squeezed my hand, her grip frail but firm. You did good, kid. I'm so proud of you. You remember what I always told you, to be strong, to stand up for myself. I replied, tears streaming down my face. That's right, and you have, she said, her voice growing fainter. I've left you something in my will, the house. It's yours now. I nodded, unable to speak, squeezing her hand. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. Later that night, she passed away quietly in her sleep. The months following her death were a blur of legal matters and settling into the house that was now legally mine. I transformed it into something that felt like a real home for the first time in my life. Then, out of the blue, my parents and Anna, with her husband and kids, decided to visit. I should have known they weren't just coming to check on how I was holding up. As soon as Anna walked in, she started inspecting the place like she was at an open house, commenting on every piece of furniture and layout. Oh, this would be perfect for the kids, she said loudly. Look at all the space, Mom. Her husband nodded, adding, yeah, we could really spread out here. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my cool. It wasn't until my mother chimed in that I lost it. Emily, you should really think about letting Anna have the house. They need the space, what with the kids and all. You can manage fine in a smaller place, can't you? I stared at them in disbelief, turning quickly into anger. Are you serious? This is my house. Aunt Sarah left it to me, not to Anna. I'm not going anywhere. Anna, who had been pretty quiet, finally piped up, her voice dripping with entitlement. But you don't need all the space, Emily. It's just you here. We're a family of 5. It just makes sense for us to have it. That's when I laughed. It wasn't because anything was funny, but because the sheer audacity of their request was absurd. You think just because you have kids and a husband, I have to give up my home. That's not how this works. Mom looked shocked. Emily, don't be greedy. Think of the family. I scoffed, the word bitter in my mouth. Where was this family when I needed a place to stay? When I needed help? They didn't have an answer to that. Look, I said, my voice firm as I stood up taller. I appreciate you all coming here, but this house is mine. Aunt Sarah wanted me to have it, and I'm going to honor her wish. You need to leave now. Anna's husband tried to argue, his face turning red, but I didn't let him get far. Out, all of you now, or I'll call the police. They muttered about me being ungrateful and greedy as they gathered their things. Anna shot me a look that could freeze lava, her disappointment clear. But as they left, the weight on my shoulders lifted. I had stood up for myself, for my home, and for Aunt Sarah's memory. I came home from work to the most absurd situation. I couldn't get into my own house. The locks had been changed. Before I could process what was happening, I heard noises inside and started banging on the door. It swung open, and there stood my sister Anna, with her husband and their kids scattered behind her. We've decided to move in here, she declared with a smug look, as if it was the most natural decision in the world. What are you talking about? This is my house. I snapped, disbelief and anger swirling inside me. Anna shrugged, unbothered. Well, we need it more than you do. We've already moved everything in. That's not how any of this works, Anna. I'm calling the police, I said, fumbling for my phone. She laughed, clearly thinking I was bluffing. Sure, go ahead. I dialed 911 while we waited. Our parents showed up, drawn by the commotion. They sided with Anna, of course. Emily, why are you being so difficult? This is family. We should stick together, Mom said, her voice high-pitched and nervous. Dad, tell her, Anna added, turning to our father, who just frowned at me. This is just plain wrong. And you know it? I shot back, the reality of the situation making my hands shake with rage. Anna's husband, who'd been silent until then, stepped up. "Just drop it, Emily, otherwise you'll regret it," he sneered, his tone menacing. I started recording on my phone, aiming it at him. "Threaten me again, and it's on record." He lunged for the phone, but I sidestepped him right then. The police arrived. It didn't take long for them to assess the situation. My sister was crying, her kids confused and scared. Anna's husband kept saying, "It's just a family matter," trying to downplay his earlier aggression. Mom was sobbing by now, pleading with the officers, "Please, they're just kids. They don't understand. We're her family." I took a deep breath before I explained to the police. They broke in and changed the locks. I didn't give them permission. This is my house. The officers were firm. Breaking into a house and changing the locks is illegal, even if you are family, one of them told Anna and her husband. Finally realizing the seriousness of the situation, my family's bluster faded. The police made it clear they had to leave. Reluctantly, and with plenty of resentful glances thrown my way, they gathered their things. After the police left, I called a locksmith to change the locks again, this time making sure no one else had the keys. As I stood in the doorway of my reclaimed space, the silence was heavy, filled with the echoes of the confrontation. It was a few months later when I met Mike. He was a friend of a friend introduced to me at a small gathering. Mike was easy to talk to with a straightforward way about him that I appreciated. "So you've had quite the year, huh?" Mike said, handing me a drink with a knowing smile. "You could say that," I replied, the corner of my mouth tilting up in a half smile. "It's been eventful." As the evening went on, we talked about everything and nothing, music, books, our shared disdain for soggy French fries. It was refreshing talking to someone who didn't see me as the overlooked sister or the woman who kicked her family out. Weeks turned into months, and Mike started coming around more often. One quiet evening, as we sat watching a movie with a bowl of popcorn between us, Mike turned to me. "Emily, I've been thinking," he began, pausing the movie. "Yeah," I responded, my heart skipping a beat. "I really like what we have. I mean, I know your house is your sanctuary, but I was wondering if you'd be okay with me being a more permanent part of it," he asked, his voice tender. I looked at him, really looked, and saw everything I needed in a sincere, hopeful gaze. "I'd like that," I said simply, and a smile lit up the room. Life didn't become perfect overnight, but it felt a whole lot lighter with Mike by my side. We faced a few more challenges, like when Anna tried to stir up trouble again by spreading rumors about me being heartless. But this time, I didn't face it alone. "Let them talk," Mike said one evening after I got a frustrating call from Mom telling me how upset Anna was. "The people who know you really know you. They know the truth. That's all that matters." He was right, and slowly I began to let go of the anger and resentment. It wasn't worth holding onto. Instead, I focused on the good, the home I was building, both the physical walls around me and the emotional barriers I was letting down. "Hi, I'm Naomi. Let me show you around my world so you know who I am. I grew up with just my mom, Sarah. She was a nurse, always busy but somehow managing to take care of us. We didn't have much, but she worked hard to make sure I never felt like we were lacking. Every evening, when she sat down at our kitchen table tired, she'd tell me about her day, how she helped an old man walk again or comforted someone who was alone. It made me want to help people too, but with less blood involved, so I chose biology. As for my dad, I never knew him. He was gone before I could even crawl, and Mom didn't talk much about him. It was just us, and that was okay. School was my thing, especially science. I loved learning about cells, genes, and the reasons behind life. After college, I ended up at a pharmaceutical company, working with compounds to create useful things. But it wasn't all work. My friend Jess made sure I had fun too. She took me to parties, urging me to loosen up. That's where I met Alex. "Come on, Naomi, to like this guy," Jess nudged me one night at a backyard party. She had that mischievous grin. "Just talk to him. His name's Alex. He's cute, funny, and into music as much as you're into science." I rolled my eyes but was secretly curious, so Jess guided me through the crowd at the party, past the guys trying too hard to dance, to where Alex stood awkwardly with a beer. Jess introduced us enthusiastically. "Hey Alex, this is Naomi," she said with a little too much excitement. "Naomi, meet Alex, the only other person I can stand for more than an hour." We ended up chatting the whole night about everything from the latest rock album to the quirkiest science facts. Turns out, Alex was into biology too, but more on the corporate side. His dad ran a toilet paper company, which I found hilarious. A toilet paper tycoon, huh? I teased. Hey, everybody needs it, Alex shot back, laughing. What about you? Saving the world one Petri dish at a time. Something like that, I grinned. We clicked instantly. A year flew by with Alex, movies, late-night talks, dinners with Jess teasing us for being too cute. Everything was great until he wanted me to meet his parents. I was up for it but nervous as heck. His dad was a big-shot business owner, and his mom was a homemaker who kept everything in order. We met at a fancy restaurant downtown with more forks at each place setting than I had in my kitchen drawers. Alex held my hand under the table, giving me a reassuring squeeze as we waited for his parents. They were usually punctual. Just on time, Alex muttered, checking his watch. Right on cue, a confident man and a stylish woman walked in, George and Linda, potentially my future in-laws. Mom, Dad, this is Naomi, Alex introduced me proudly. Linda smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes as she looked me up and down. George, on the other hand, gave me a warm handshake. Nice to meet you, Naomi. Alex has told us a lot about you, George said, settling beside his wife. The dinner started well enough. We chatted about mundane things, restaurant decor, George's toilet paper empire, which he talked about with a mix of amusement and pride. Then Linda, swirling her wine glass, leaned in with a smile that felt more like a shark eyeing its next meal. So Linda casually asked me about my work as a biologist, and I tried to sound enthusiastic and modest. Then she asked about my father. Her question felt heavy, and the table went quiet. Alex's grip on my hand tightened. I hesitated before explaining that I never knew my dad. It had just been me and my mom. Linda's eyebrows shot up, and her smile faltered. Oh, I see. That's rather unfortunate, she commented, her tone turning somber. It's hard not knowing if there's a history of undesirable traits. I felt a lump in my throat. I think people are more than their genetics, I managed to say, my voice steady despite the unease. Of course, but you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Linda continued, her words carrying weight. For all we know, he could have been a drunk or worse. And being raised by a single mother, well, it's not the ideal situation for stability, is it? George seemed uncomfortable and tried to change the subject, but Linda persisted, saying these were legitimate concerns for their family's future. Alex finally spoke up, defending me firmly. Mom, Naomi is amazing. She's smart, kind, and the hardest worker I know. Whatever her dad was or wasn't doesn't change who she is. The rest of the meal felt tense. I pushed my food around my plate, feeling like I was being judged and found lacking. When we finally left, the relief was palpable. A year of mostly happiness and a little family drama flew by. Now we were sitting at my mom's cozy kitchen table discussing wedding plans. Mom was thrilled about the big day. Naomi, this is going to be beautiful, she said with tears of joy in her eyes. I'm so proud of you, my mom kept saying, squeezing my hand as we discussed wedding colors and themes. Suddenly, Alex's phone buzzed and his face fell as he glanced at the caller ID. It's my mom, he said, excusing himself to take the call in the next room. His change in demeanor made my stomach tighten with nerves. I exchanged a worried look with my mom, who mouthed, "Is everything okay?" Moments later, Alex returned, looking pale and shaken. My dad had an accident. He's in the hospital. We need to go now, he said urgently. We grabbed our things and rushed to the hospital. The drive felt agonizingly long, each second filled with dread. When we arrived, Linda, Alex's mom, was pacing in the waiting area, clearly distraught. He lost consciousness while driving, she explained tearfully. Thank God someone saw and called for help. He was supposed to be at a meeting. They're saying it's his lungs. They found a serious disease. My heart sank. What do they say needs to be done? I asked, trying to stay calm for Alex's sake. He needs a lung transplant, Linda choked out. They want to check if Alex could be a donor. Without hesitation, Alex spoke up. Let's do whatever tests are needed. I'm here. I'm ready. They took Alex away for tests, and Linda and I sat in tense silence under the harsh hospital lights. Finally, Alex returned, holding a sheet of paper. They've done the blood tests, he said, looking troubled. Naomi, this is odd. He handed me the results. I glanced at the paper and my eyes widened. Blood type AB, I said, remembering our conversation about blood types. Didn't you tell me both your parents are type A? I asked. Yeah, they are, Alex replied, looking puzzled. If both your parents are type A, you can't be AB, I explained slowly, my scientific instincts kicking in. Alex's face went pale. What does that mean? I took a deep breath. Let's not unravel this here. Let's keep this info for now, I said, snapping a photo of the results on my phone. We might need to think this through later. Confused, Alex nodded. But before we could dwell on this, a doctor approached us. Your fiancé isn't a match, unfortunately, the doctor said briskly, but we're arranging for another potential donor. The surgery is urgent. We spent the next hours waiting anxiously, caught between medical updates and personal questions. Despite everything, my mind kept circling back to the mystery of Alex's blood type. Despite the lingering issue with Alex's blood type, I pushed it aside and focused on being there for him, hoping for his dad's recovery. After a successful surgery and Alex's dad's swift recovery, we decided not to put our lives on hold any longer. We went ahead with our engagement party, hoping for a celebration and a new beginning. We chose a lovely restaurant overlooking the river, thinking it would be perfect for a joyful night. I was busy making sure everything was just right, but my nerves were shot. My mom was running late due to a last-minute emergency at her clinic, which I knew would spark some snide remarks. Sure enough, as the guests started arriving, Linda took her chance. Dressed to impress, she arrived with a frosty air that could chill champagne. Starting without the mother of the bride, are we? Linda said loudly, making sure her voice carried. Well, I suppose punctuality isn't valued in some families, Naomi dear. It's such a shame your mother's habits reflect so poorly on you, she continued, shaking her head. I clenched my jaw, forcing a smile. She got caught up at work, Linda. You know, saving lives. She'll be here any minute, I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite my rising frustration. Linda tutted and shook her head, pulling some relatives closer. It's always something, isn't it? An engagement dinner is a significant event, yet it seems some people don't treat it with the respect it deserves. It's just such behavior that makes one question the upbringing, doesn't it? I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this night wasn't about Linda or her approval. Everyone who knows us understands and respects why she might be late. It's really not a problem for anyone here, I countered firmly. Oh, but it is, Naomi. When you marry into a family, you bring your background with you. And let's be honest, dear, your background is a bit muddled, isn't it? Linda continued, her voice dripping with disdain. The murmurs around us grew, and I saw Alex's face darken from across the room. He started to make his way over, but I signaled him to let me handle it. Linda, my mother has done a remarkable job raising me on her own. She's shown me the value of hard work and integrity, something we all appreciate here, I said loudly, making sure my voice carried conviction. And Alex and I are committed to each other regardless of what anyone else thinks or says. The atmosphere was thick with tension, but I didn't want the evening to spiral into conflict. I took a deep breath, glancing around at the gathered friends and family who were here to celebrate with us. Let's not let this delay us any further, I suggested calmly. The engagement dinner was finally in full swing despite the rocky start. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, laughing and chatting over delicious food. I was busy making sure all our guests felt welcomed when suddenly, the front door of the restaurant swung open. It was Mom finally here, looking a bit flustered but beautiful in her elegant dress. Sorry I'm so late, everyone, she called out, making her way through the crowd toward our table where Alex's parents sat. I thought it was as good a time as any to formally introduce her. Mom, this is George and Linda, Alex's parents, I said with a smile, gesturing towards them. But as soon as my mom laid eyes on George, her whole demeanor changed. She let out a sharp gasp, covered her eyes with her hands, and staggered back a step. It was as if she'd seen a ghost. Mom, what's wrong? I rushed to her side, completely bewildered. She was pale, shaking her head as if to dispel a nightmare. George, too, looked like he'd been struck, his face draining of color, his eyes fixed on the floor. This can't be happening, my mom murmured, her voice barely audible. We can't. This wedding can't go on. Confused and starting to panic, I pressed her. Mom, what are you talking about? What's going on? She finally looked up, tears filling her eyes. Naomi, this is too much. George is your father. We can't do this. The room fell silent instantly, the earlier noise dying down as murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. Everyone was trying to grasp what they had just heard. Linda, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. George, what is she talking about? What is this nonsense? Linda demanded, her voice tense. George couldn't meet her eyes. He just stared at the ground, his voice a tortured whisper. It's true, Linda. I was with Sarah before you. When she told me she was pregnant, I wasn't ready. I left her. I never knew. I never thought. Alex, who had been standing by my side, looked like he was going to crumble right there. Dad, you mean Naomi and I are? He couldn't even finish the sentence, his face crumpling in despair. I felt numb, the shock too overwhelming to process. My fiancé, the man I loved, was my half-brother. It was like a twisted nightmare, except I was wide awake. We can't be together, Alex managed to choke out, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't know what to say or feel. Everything was collapsing around us, our future, our plans, our life. The revelation about my dad had turned the room into a pressure cooker, with confusion and shock on everyone's faces. Amidst the chaos, I remembered something crucial, the blood test results from before Alex's dad's surgery. I needed to make sense of everything, not just for myself but for everyone caught in this mess. Can everyone just stop for a moment? I spoke up, my voice cutting through the murmurs louder than I expected. Linda, I said, looking directly at Alex's mom, I have to ask, why do you and Alex have different blood types? What's going on there? Linda's face went pale, and she looked around, searching for an explanation. She opened her mouth, then closed it, the words failing her. George, her husband, turned to her, his expression hardening. Tell me the truth, Linda. Now, George's voice boomed across the room, his patience worn thin. Linda stumbled over her words, trying to deflect and save face. It's a misunderstanding, that's all. Naomi is trying to make a scandal where there isn't one. But just as she tried to deflect, her sister, who had been silent until now, stood up. Her face was resolute, like she had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. No, Linda, I can't do this anymore. I won't cover for you, her sister said, her voice steady and resolute. Linda was already pregnant when she married George. He isn't Alex's father. She lied to keep her secret. The room erupted into gasps and whispers as the guests turned to each other, their expressions filled with disbelief and dismay. Linda tried to speak, to salvage her facade, but the truth was out, hitting harder than anything else she could say. Is this true? George's voice cracked, the pain evident in his words. Linda's silence was answer enough. Alex looked from his mother to his uncle, then back to me. The hurt in his eyes was almost too much to bear. Mom, how could you? His voice was a whisper, a plea for something, anything that might make sense of the chaos. Linda's facade finally crumbled, her defense weak and feeble. I thought it was best at the time to protect everyone, she murmured. But her words fell flat amidst the shock of her deceit. The room was thick with tension as everyone processed the revelations that had turned the night upside down. No one seemed to take Linda's side. The sympathy was with me, my mom, and strangely enough, with George, who had been lied to just as much as anyone. As the evening wound down, the guests slowly began to leave, their whispers and looks of sympathy trailing behind them. Alex stayed by my side, his earlier joy replaced by a somber quiet. We'll figure this out, Naomi, he said, finally squeezing my hand. We're not alone in this. We have each other. Yeah, I managed to say, the weight of his words both a comfort and a reminder of the complicated path ahead together, whatever that meant now. The days following the engagement dinner felt like walking through a fog. Alex and I had decided to take some time to ourselves to process everything. We weren't breaking up, but we couldn't pretend our relationship could go on the same either. It was one of those tough decisions that neither of us wanted but both knew was necessary. A week later, I met up with my mom and George at a quiet coffee shop. It was the first time we were talking since the big revelation. The air was thick with awkwardness as we sat down. George looked older, the lines on his face deeper, weighed down by guilt. I'm sorry, Naomi. I can't say it enough. If I'd known, if I'd just faced up to what I did back then. George's voice trailed off, his eyes not meeting mine. Yeah, Well, you didn't, and here we are, I replied, not ready to offer forgiveness yet. You missed my whole life, and now things are a mess. I know, and I'm here to make whatever amends I can, George said earnestly. I've missed so much, and I regret that deeply. I want to be part of your life now, if you'll let me. I looked at my mom, who had been quietly sipping her coffee. Mom, what do you think? Can we even start to fix this? She set her cup down, her voice steady. I've had a lot of years to think about what happened. I was angry, so angry at George for a long time. But holding onto that hasn't helped me or you. If George is sincere, and I believe he is, maybe it's time we tried to move forward. Moving forward sounded good in theory, but it was hard to know where to start. Okay, let's say we try this. What does moving forward even look like? I asked genuinely, unsure of what the next steps would be. Uncertain, George leaned forward, his expression serious. For starters, I want to be there for you however you need, and not just with words, financially, emotionally. Whatever gaps I can fill. It felt weird considering letting George in after everything, but Mom seemed to think it was worth trying, and I trusted her more than anyone. And what about Linda and Alex? I asked, the question hanging over us. George's face clouded over. Linda and I are figuring things out. As for Alex, he's heartbroken, Naomi. He loves you. He wants to stay in your life, if you'll have him. My heart ached at the mention of Alex. I don't know how to be around him and not feel everything I felt before. But I don't want to lose him either. It's going to take some time, George assured. Take all the time you need. We'll go at whatever pace you set. After everything that happened, the dust finally settled, and the biggest surprise was that Alex and I found our way back to each other despite the unbelievable twists our lives had taken. Our love proved resilient. We realized that no matter what, we couldn't imagine our lives apart. Eventually, we celebrated our wedding surrounded by those who supported us through thick and thin, and it was genuinely the happiest day of my life. Life went on, and as for Alex's parents, they ended up divorcing. George, feeling betrayed by years of deception, left Linda without alimony or a share in the joint property. He was deeply hurt but decided to channel his efforts into something positive by transferring all his property and business to Alex and me. Running the business has been a challenge, but Alex handles it like he was born for it, and I've never been prouder of him. Things between George and my mom, Sarah, are still tense. Mom never fully forgave him for leaving her all those years ago, and their interactions are mostly cordial and only for the sake of family harmony. It's not perfect, but they manage for our sakes. As for Linda, after the divorce, she moved to another city. We don't hear much from her, and she wasn't invited to the wedding. Honestly, neither Alex nor I want to rekindle that connection. It's better for everyone this way. Sitting in our backyard, Alex and I often talk about how our journey together has been anything but ordinary. Remember when we thought planning a wedding was going to be our biggest challenge? I joked one evening, sipping on my tea as the sun set beautifully in front of us. Alex laughed, wrapping an arm around me. Yeah, life threw us some curveballs, didn't it? But look at us now. Yeah, stronger than ever. I agreed, leaning into him. I wouldn't change a thing about our story. We've come to understand that life doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful. We faced challenges that would have broken many, but here we are, living proof that what doesn't kill you really does make you stronger. Our story isn't just about the struggles, but also about overcoming them, about love finding a way, and about building a future together, no matter what. When I was growing up, the difference between me and my twin sister Anna was huge. She was the golden girl, but I wasn't. Our dad was a serious university professor who cared a lot about his books and lectures. Our mom loved taking care of our home and us, and she really wanted us to be just like her. At home, it often felt like I was in a never-ending critique session. My parents had a clear idea of what the perfect family should be, and it didn't include a daughter like me, who liked band t-shirts and being alone. Eliza, why can't you be more like your sister? My mom would often say, especially when I wore headphones to breakfast to block out the world. Anna, on the other hand, always seemed to do everything right and got all the praise. One Saturday, we were getting ready for one of my dad's boring faculty parties, which we had to go to. I decided to rebel a bit by wearing dark eyeliner and boots that definitely didn't fit my mom's idea of what I should wear. You're not going out like that, are you? My mom said when she saw me on the stairs, looking at my boots like they were covered in mud. I shrugged, my usual defense. Don't see why not, I replied casually. My mom sighed, a long, disappointed sigh that made it clear I was the biggest letdown in her perfectly ordered world. Please, Eliza, just this once, can't you try to fit in? She pleaded. What for? So you can pretend we're the perfect family? I shot back, tired of the same old arguments. It's not about pretending. It's about showing respect for your father, she argued, her voice sharp and serious. Anna overheard us and came trotting down the hallway in her heels, sounding like a judge approaching the bench. Mom's right, Liz. It's not that hard to look decent. Why do you always have to make things difficult? Maybe I don't want to be a clone of you, Anna, I snapped, feeling my face flush with frustration. I hated these arguments, hated being compared, but most of all, I hated feeling like the odd one out in my own home. Dad appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his expression serious. Eliza, go change now. We're leaving in 10 minutes, he said firmly. His tone left no room for argument. He didn't need to yell. The disappointment in his eyes was enough to make me march back to my room. As we drove to the party, the car was silent except for the classical music Dad insisted on playing because it was calming. I stared out the window, watching the trees blur past. In that moment, I promised myself someday I'd live a life where no one could tell me what to wear, how to act, or who to be. Someday, I'd be free from these expectations. My room was the only corner of the house where I could pretend I was somewhere else, anywhere else. Unlike the rest of the house, which was filled with my parents' choices, my room was mine. It wasn't much, just 4 walls covered in sketches and music posters. But my room was my escape from my family's expectations. One evening, as I tried to lose myself in a playlist of my favorite bands, Dad knocked and marched into my room, his face set in a familiar frown. Eliza, turn that noise down. And why haven't you studied with Anna today? You know you both have exams coming up, he said, his voice stern. I pulled out one earbud and looked up at him, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been studying, just not with Anna. I learn better on my own. Dad shook his head, clearly not convinced. You know the rules. Your sister gets good grades, and you should be doing the same. I don't see why you always have to make things difficult. It's not about making things difficult, I said, my frustration growing. I just don't see why I have to follow Anna's way of doing everything. Can't I have my own way of studying? He didn't respond to that, instead shifting his complaint. And those friends of yours, I saw you with them at the cafe yesterday. I don't think they're a good influence. He should be spending time with the daughters of my colleagues. They're more suitable. I felt my temper rise. Suitable for what? For you? Because they talk about economics and pretend to enjoy those boring university gatherings. Before he could answer, Mom appeared at the doorway, her voice sharp as she joined in. Eliza, your father is right. Those girls are from good families. They know how to behave. They're the kind of friends you should want. I stood up, facing both of them. What if I don't want friends who are picked for me? What if I want to choose my own friends, choose what I study, or even what I want to be? That's enough, Eliza, Mom said, her tone final. You know your future is with the university. Your father has made sure of that. And after you graduate, you'll need to start thinking about settling down. We've already discussed this. Settling down, the words hung in the air like a life sentence. You mean start thinking about being someone's wife like Anna? Is that all you think I'm meant for? Mom's face softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. We want what's best for you. Following the path we set out will give you a good life. A good life, I repeated, the bitterness of irony filling my mouth. Is it a good life if it's someone else's idea of good? No one answered that question. They didn't need to. We all knew there was no point in arguing. They had their plans, and they expected me to fall in line, just like Anna. Anna and I were like two sides of the same coin, always together but never on the same page. At university where Dad taught, the differences between us became even more apparent. She was into business management, the golden child, always nodding along in lectures, asking smart questions that made professors appreciate her. Then there was me, stuck in the same program but feeling like I was wearing the shoe on the wrong foot. Awkward, uncomfortable, and just plain wrong. One afternoon, as I trudged through a mountain of textbooks in the library, Anna breezed in, her notes organized, her smile ready. Hey Liz, you coming to the study group tonight? Professor Hall mentioned he's dropping by. Could be good for us to show face, she said, her tone light but insistent. I glanced up, feeling the weight of her expectations. No, I don't think so. Those things aren't really my scene, you know. She frowned, placing her books down with a thud that matched her disapproval. It's not about it being your scene, Liz. It's about making the right impressions. You need to start taking this seriously. We're graduating soon. I shrugged, turning back to my notes. I am taking it seriously, just not in a way that makes me miserable. Why bother pretending? Because, Liz, sometimes you have to play the game to get ahead. You think I like all of this? She gestured around at her perfectly tabbed textbooks and color-coded notes. It's not about liking. It's about doing what's necessary, she said. I shook my head, pushing back my chair with a scrape. Well, maybe I'm tired of doing what's necessary according to everyone else. Did you ever think of that? Her voice softened, but her eyes were steel. Liz, I'm just trying to look out for you. Dad's not going to be around to sort things out forever. What are you going to do if you keep alienating everyone? Maybe I'll figure it out on my own. Maybe I don't need to follow Dad's roadmap or yours. I shot back, feeling a surge of defiance. Anna sighed, her frustration clear. You're so stubborn. Just try, okay. For me, if not for yourself. Show up tonight, talk to Professor Hall. It won't kill you. I really looked at her, and saw not just my annoyingly perfect sister, but someone who actually cared in her own way. Fine, I'll think about it. I conceded, not ready to promise more. Thank you, she said, her smile returning. It's not that bad, you know. You might even like it if you gave it a chance. Doubt it, I muttered, but I knew I'd lost this round. For Anna, I'd show up, sit through another boring discussion, and nod at the right times. It was just a few hours, I told myself. How bad could it be? As it turned out, not as bad as I thought. Professor Hall was surprisingly interesting when he wasn't lecturing from a podium. I even asked a question, which earned a shocked but pleased look from Anna. Later, as we walked back to our dorm, Anna nudged me. See? Not so terrible, right? That fragile peace didn't last long, however. In our last year, Anna introduced us to her fiancé, a lawyer 10 years her senior, already well established and exactly what our parents dreamed of. Mom and Dad were over the moon, praising Anna for making such a smart match, and immediately turned their expectant eyes on me. Now, Eliza, it's your turn to find someone suitable, Dad said one evening over dinner, his tone implying that my time was running out. Mom nodded enthusiastically, already planning out my life as if it were another one of her well-organized home projects. Think about your future, dear. Someone who can provide for you, who has a good standing, she said. I remember staring at my plate, feeling the walls close in. Anna's wedding was meticulously planned down to the last detail by Mom, from the bridesmaids' dresses to the floral arrangements, showcasing her perfect vision of family prestige. After the wedding, Mom often visited Anna, doling out advice and ensuring her life played out just as she had orchestrated. Witnessing this, I knew one thing for certain. I didn't want my life tailored by someone else's hands. One day, while walking down the street lost in thoughts of how to escape the life my parents envisioned for me, I heard the deep rumble of a motorcycle. Approaching, curiosity pulled me toward the sound. That's when I saw him, Jake, with his leather jacket and carefree smile, pulling up beside me. You look like you need a ride, he called over the roar of the engine, a playful twinkle in his eyes. I hesitated, glancing back towards the path home, then at his outstretched hand. What did I have to lose? Sure, why not? I replied, my voice a mix of nerves and excitement. Climbing onto the back of his bike, I felt a rush of adrenaline as we sped away. The wind whipped through my hair, and for the first time in a long time, I laughed genuinely. Jake shouted something about showing me his world, and I held on tighter, not wanting this moment to end. We stopped at a diner frequented by bikers, ordering burgers and fries. Jake told me about his life as a welder, his passion for bikes, and his love for the open road. It was so different from anything I was used to, raw and real. Don't we get scared living like this? I asked, my voice barely above the clatter of plates and chatter around us. Scared? No, it's thrilling. You never know what's around the corner. Isn't that better than having everything planned out for you? He replied, his eyes lighting up with each word. Over the next few weeks, we met secretly. Each ride on Jake's motorcycle pulled me further from the life I was supposed to live and closer to the life I wanted. The speed, the adventure, it wasn't just about the thrill. It was about feeling alive, feeling free. One evening, as we watched the sunset from a secluded overlook, Jake turned to me. Eliza, I don't just ride to escape. I ride to feel alive, to make every moment count. With you, every moment feels like it's worth something. I leaned into him, my heart beating fast. I've never felt like this before. You make me feel free, Jake. He smiled, pulling me closer. Then let's not go back to just existing. Let's live. 6 months with Jake felt like a lifetime of moments I'd always dreamed of. The day he proposed under the stars, with the gentle rumble of his bike in the background, my heart screamed a yes before my mouth could form the word. It was perfect, except for one looming hurdle, my parents. I wrestled with the fear of introducing Jake to them. He was everything they disapproved of, his rough edges, his wild spirit, his simple yet content life as a welder. But love bolstered my courage, and I decided it was time they knew. The day I brought Jake home, he was clad in his usual attire, a leather vest, black t-shirt, ripped jeans, and a bandana. I loved that about him, he was unapologetically himself. As we walked up the driveway, I could already feel the weight of my parents' judgment. Stepping inside, Mom's face went pale at the sight of Jake, her eyes widening in shock. "What in the world, Eliza?" she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Dad's reaction was harsher, his words sharp as knives. "Who is this, and why is he dressed like a thug in our house?" I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. "Mom, Dad, this is Jake. He's the man I love. We're getting married." Their silence was deafening. Then Dad turned to Jake, his tone laced with disdain. "Married? What do you do for a living, young man? What are your qualifications?" Jake, bless him, didn't waver. "I'm a welder. I took some specialized courses after high school. I work hard and make an honest living." The look on my parents' faces was a mix of horror and disbelief. "A welder, Eliza? You can't be serious," Mom said, her voice trembling. Dad's anger flared. "You expect us to give our blessing to this? To throw away your future for a welder?" I felt my resolve harden. "Yes, because he makes me happy. Isn't that what should matter?" "But the life you lead," Mom started, her voice faltering. "Will be the life I choose," I shot back, my own voice gaining strength. Dad shook his head, his decision clear. "We cannot and will not support this. If you choose him, don't expect to be a part of this family." The finality in his tone broke my heart, but not my decision. Jake squeezed my hand, giving me the strength to face them. "Then I choose Jake. I choose us. I choose my happiness." Mom's eyes filled with tears, and Dad's jaw clenched tight. "If you walk out with him, don't bother coming back," Dad said, his voice cold. Walking away from my parents' house with Jake, my heart was a mess of emotions, pain, relief, excitement, and fear all mixed into one. The night air felt different, like each breath I took was a step further into a new life. We rode in silence for a while, the only sound, the steady roar of the motorcycle beneath us, filled the air as we finally stopped at a small diner on the outskirts of town. Jake turned to me, his face serious. "Are you sure about this, Eliza? I mean really sure. There's no going back after tonight," he said, his eyes searching mine for any hint of doubt. I nodded, squeezing his hand tightly. "I've never been more sure of anything. Being with you feels right. It feels like what I'm supposed to do." He smiled that reckless, charming smile that had won me over the first day we met. "All right then, let's do it. Let's start our life together." Inside the diner, we found a quiet booth in the corner. The waitress brought over 2 coffees without asking, and we sat there planning our next steps. "So what's first?" I asked, stirring cream into my coffee, watching it swirl and blend. "We'll need to find a place to stay, at least for a while. Then maybe look for jobs. I have some buddies who can help us get started," Jake replied, his tone practical but optimistic. "It's going to be tough, isn't it?" I said, more a statement than a question. The reality of what we were doing was beginning to sink in. Jake reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "It might be, but we'll handle it together. Tough is nothing new for either of us, right?" I couldn't help but laugh, a short, sharp burst of genuine amusement. "Right, together." We spent hours in that diner talking and planning. Every so often, Jake would throw out an idea that sounded so wild, so free, that it made my heart jump. "And maybe one day we'll save enough to take that road trip across the country. Just you, me, and the open road," he said. "I like that," I replied, allowing myself to dream bigger than I had ever dared. Riding back into the city, we began our search. The next weeks were a blur of activity. We found a small apartment on the edge of town, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Jake found work at a local garage and I picked up shifts at a nearby diner. Life was hard, but it was ours. We made do with what we had, and every night when we came home to each other, it felt like we had everything. Months later, we decided it was time to make it official and got married in a small, intimate ceremony. I held on to a sliver of hope that my family would show up, that they would see how happy I was and let go of their prejudices. But the chairs reserved for them remained empty, and no congratulatory messages came. Despite the sting of their absence, the day was perfect because it was ours. Over time, I grew incredibly close to Jake's mom. She welcomed me with open arms, calling me her daughter and filling in the gaps left by my own family. Her warmth and acceptance healed some of the wounds left by my parents' rejection. Things were finally looking up for Jake and me. After he completed additional diving training and became a certified underwater welder, his income shot up to $150,000 a year. That change made a world of difference. We managed to buy a townhouse in a nice area, the kind of place I'd always dreamed about but never thought I'd actually live in. I started working as a dispatcher in Jake's company. It wasn't just a job. It felt like I was part of something important, supporting the man I loved and building our future together. On weekends, we escaped the city on his bike, roaring through winding roads and taking in breathtaking views of nature. Those moments with the wind in my hair and his warmth against my back were pure bliss. Living nearby, my mother-in-law became a frequent visitor. One such afternoon, while Jake was tinkering in the garage and I was fixing us some coffee, she arrived looking a bit troubled. "There's been some ugly news," she said as she settled down at the kitchen table. "Something about a professor at the university involved in a harassment scandal." My heart skipped a beat. "Oh, did they say who it was?" I tried to keep my voice steady, dreading the answer. She shook her head. "No, they didn't mention a name on the radio. But you know how these things go. It's probably all over the TV by now." Nodding, I flicked on the television, tuning into the news. Sure enough, there was a report on the scandal, and as I had feared, my father's face appeared on the screen. The anchor detailed accusations against him, and I felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over me. Turning off the TV, I sat down heavily, trying to process the news. Jake came in, wiping his hands on a rag, and saw my face. "What's wrong, babe?" he asked, his brow furrowed in concern. I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. "It's my dad. He's been accused of harassing a student." Jake's expression hardened for a moment before he came over and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Eliza. That's tough news. How do you want to handle this?" I shook my head, not really sure of anything at the moment. "I don't know. What can I even do? It's not like we're close anymore." He squeezed my hand, understanding. "Whatever you need, I'm here for you. We don't have to figure it all out right now." I decided to wait and see how things unfolded before making any moves. Whatever decision I made, I knew I'd have Jake by my side, and that was the reassurance I needed to face whatever came next. Life had been peaceful until that unexpected afternoon at work when a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. I hadn't seen my parents in a long while, and the sight of them stirred up a mix of emotions I thought I had put to rest. Both of them looked dramatically changed. The scandal had taken its toll. Mom had lost a lot of weight and looked years older, while Dad appeared broken, a shadow of the stern man he once was. My mother spotted me and rushed over, arms open as if nothing had happened, as if years of distance and disapproval could be bridged in an instant. But I couldn't embrace her, not now. Instead, I stepped back and took Jake's hand, looking for strength in his presence. "Eliza, it was so hard to find you," Mom said, her voice cracking with emotion. Dad, ever the gruff one, cut to the chase, his voice harsh and bitter. "I was accused unfairly, you know. I went to your sister's husband for help, but that bloodsucker wanted a fortune. Your sister sided with him, and now they've kicked us out. We need your help." I stared at them, disbelief and anger swirling inside me. "Help? After all these years, you show up and demand help? We have nowhere else to go." Mom's voice was desperate. "They've disowned us too. We thought maybe we could stay with you." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Stay with me? After you disowned me? You made it clear I wasn't your daughter anymore." Dad's face turned red, his old temper flaring up. You owe us, Eliza, after all we've done for you. That's where you're wrong, I interrupted, feeling Jake squeeze my hand in support. I don't owe you anything. You threw me out because I chose my happiness over your demands, and now you want— what? To just move in and pretend like we're a family? The situation was spiraling, and I could see people watching, a crowd beginning to form. Mom started to cry, her sobs loud and attracting even more attention. You're being ungrateful after everything we've done for you, she accused through her tears. I took a deep breath, my decision clear. No, Mom. I'm not ungrateful. I'm free and happy. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. As we walked away, I heard my dad yelling, but Jake leaned over and quietly told the security team, "Don't let them come here again." The following months flew by, filled with love and peace. We welcomed a son, a new beginning in our growing family. My parents never came back. That day in the parking lot was the last I saw of them. And while part of me grieved for what could have been, I knew I had made the right choice for me and for my family. My name is Karen, and I'm 25 years old. My grandfather, who raised me, passed away 6 months ago. Today is the day when the lawyer will read my grandfather's will. That's why I was visiting my grandfather's house with my sister Susan, who is 4 years older than me and is my only family. Our parents died in an accident 20 years ago, and since then, we were taken care of by our grandparents. After my grandmother passed away a few years ago due to illness, my grandfather's health declined year by year, and he became frequently ill. Because I was worried about him, I lived in an apartment near his house and often went back to check on him. "You're a grown woman. It's not right to keep coming back home," my grandfather would say, though he would always laugh cheerfully nonetheless. Then one day, when I visited as usual, I found my grandfather lying in pain at the entrance. In a panic, I called the ambulance, but my grandfather passed away suddenly. "Hey, what are you daydreaming for? At least prepare some tea." My sister's voice brought me back to reality. "Right, the lawyer will be here soon," I responded and headed to the kitchen. Glancing quickly, I saw my sister lazily stretching out her legs on the mat and yawning. I could still smell my sister's strong perfume even in the kitchen. I thought to myself, making a face. "She's the same as always," I murmured quietly as I placed the kettle on the stove. My sister has always been self-centered. Since she was a teenager, she started dyeing her hair frequently, as if it were natural. She hung out with troublemakers and was always out, demanding money without working, assuming that part-time jobs were unnecessary. Even when she caused trouble and our grandparents had to apologize for her, she remained unfazed. I, being the quiet one, often had to deal with the fallout. She doesn't seem to have changed much even after growing up. She doesn't have a stable job and just drifts around while working part-time. I knew she had been asking our grandfather for money whenever I wasn't around. It's easy to imagine that she would find all this troublesome if it weren't for the inheritance. "Oh, you must be the lawyer. Thank you for coming today," I heard my sister's formal voice as the lawyer arrived. I hurriedly placed tea leaves into the teapot and headed towards the entrance. "Thank you for coming today." I had met the lawyer at the funeral. His eyes were as kind as my grandfather's. A lawyer's badge shone brightly on his chest. After offering incense in front of my grandfather's portrait, he took a sip of the tea I served and then took out my grandfather's will, which was entrusted to him while he was still alive. The will stated that my elder sister Susan would inherit $20 million in cash, and I, the younger daughter, would inherit the house and the land it sits on. Upon hearing this, my sister burst out laughing. $20 million in cash for the elder daughter and only an old house for the younger one? How hilarious. It's just right for someone as plain as you. "It's not just the house. There's also the land," I retorted, to which my sister laughed snidely. "Huh, the value of this land in such a god-forsaken place is hardly surprising. I guess I would have preferred cash." Grandpa must have had a soft spot for me after all. I couldn't deny feeling a bit shocked. I suppose my grandfather wanted me to protect his beloved house and land where he spent his life with my grandmother. Huh, a house and land. That's pretty awesome, isn't it? Brian, my boyfriend, exclaimed in surprise after hearing my story. I shook my head, implying it's not as great as it sounds. "Not really. My sister inherited $20 million in cash." "That's more impressive," I admitted, feeling a sense of emptiness saying it out loud. Even though I was being modest, verbalizing it felt like an acknowledgement. "Wow, beautiful, and has money." Now she's the more's the better victory, Brian said insensitively. I shot Brian a side glance for his insensitive comment. Realizing his misstep, he joked, "Your comfort means more to me than money, Karen." Brian has been my boyfriend since I started working. We met at a social event, and being of the same age, we clicked well. I've introduced him to my grandfather and my sister. While he hasn't proposed yet, I have been considering marriage. Today was our first date in the wild, and I ended up telling Brian about my inheritance. I suppose it was because I thought he would become my husband someday. I had no idea I would come to regret this. A few days later, I was visiting the family home I had inherited from my grandfather. I had intended to clean and sort out my grandfather's belongings. The property was large, but the house was modest. I figured I could manage it on my own and looked around the house, pondering. It's close to my workplace. Maybe I should move here. Living here leisurely with a cat doesn't sound too bad. There would be no rent to pay, and while there might be maintenance costs for deterioration, I have been working hard and saving. Feeling embarrassed at the thought of moving in with Brian someday, I vigorously shook my head. Rolling up my sleeves to begin cleaning, I was interrupted by a phone call. My sister's name appeared on my smartphone screen. "Sis, what's up?" "Hey Karen, having fun all by yourself in that old house?" My sister sounded drunk, her words drawn out uniquely, even more so than usual. "Since you're drinking, aren't you?" "It's still afternoon," I pointed out with a sigh. "Oh, you're such a Miss Goody Two-Shoes," she exaggeratedly sighed back, confirming my suspicion. I was thinking about moving here eventually. I answered her question, hoping to end the conversation quickly. "Really? I'm enjoying a suite in a luxury hotel right now," my sister boasted loudly. "Guess who I'm with right now?" she teased. "I have no idea," I replied. "Boring. It's that kind of attitude that'll make Brian dislike you." "What?" I was taken aback when Brian's voice suddenly took over the line. The sudden intervention threw me off balance, dizzying question marks popping up in my head. But I dismissed my imagination. "Surprise, huh?" My sister's mean-spirited voice chimed in. "Ever since you introduced him to me, I thought Brian was quite a catch." She continued boastfully, describing how she had been attracted to Brian since I introduced him, knew where he worked because of me, and approached him as soon as he left work. She claimed he came along readily when she asked and told her she was hundreds of times more attractive than me. I listened in stunned silence. "Karen, I'm really sorry." Brian's voice broke the silence. "Tell me it's a mistake." I tried to speak, but he cut in again. "As a man, I had to take this opportunity," he explained. "What? I do feel bad about it," he added. "But come on, it's impossible to resist a beautiful woman who has $20 million, right?" Brian's tone drained my emotions away. I felt a cold sensation, like my blood was being drained from me. "You know what? I don't need a man like you," I retorted, feeling a surge of anger and hurt. At my words, I could hear my sister laughing uproariously in the background. The voice on the phone changed back to my sister. "Well, that's how it is. From now on, let's not consider ourselves sisters, okay? I wouldn't want you turning to me just because you're broke," she coldly declared before ending the call. Overwhelmed by emotions that had lagged behind, all I could do was cry out. 5 years have passed since then. I had a cat in my lap, dozing off in front of my laptop. Today was my day off, but there was still a bit of work left from what I brought home. "Oh no, this won't get the work done," I muttered to myself, feeling guilty as I gently moved the cat off my lap. Just as I reached out, my phone started to ring. An unfamiliar number was displayed on my smartphone. Thinking it could be work-related, I answered the call without any suspicion. "Hello?" "Karen, long time no see." The voice instantly froze me. It was unmistakably my sister's distinctive way of speaking. "It's you, Karen, isn't it? I can tell just from your initial hello. After all, I'm your big sister," she continued. 5 years had passed, which should make Susan 34 now. A smirk formed at the corner of my mouth at her unchanging way of talking. "You're just the same. By the way, I came home and there's a hotel standing. Did you sell the house?" she inquired, probing into my affairs. "That's none of your business," I replied sharply. "Oh, come on, it's quite a grand hotel, huh? You must have made a good chunk of change, huh?" she persisted. Getting fed up, I was about to end the call when she started to chatter about her current situation. According to Susan, she had blown through the inheritance in about 2 years and now had a considerable amount of debt. Even Brian, whom she was still hanging around, seemed to be drowning in debt. I was speechless. Honestly, I couldn't care less. Against Susan's yelling, I answered calmly, "So lend me some money." I've always wondered why Grandpa distributed his estate that way. But on the day you took Brian from me and cut ties, I understood. I began slowly. 5 years ago, when Brian broke up with me, I was crushed. After crying my heart out, I sat dazed in my room, staring into space. "I'm such a fool," I murmured, and large tears began to spill again. My gaze fell on a painting I had made as a child and had gifted to my grandfather. He had framed it and kept it hanging lovingly. Unsteadily rising, I picked up the painting. "Grandpa," I whispered. As feelings of nostalgia and loneliness welled up, tears started to come. I felt something drop from the back of the frame. Picking it up, I saw it was a fresh sheet of notepaper addressed to me. I remembered how, when I was little, I used to stick notes on the back of this frame and exchange secret messages with my grandfather. It was like a family journal, really. Knowing that I was to inherit the house, he probably figured I'd find this note. "I'm glad I noticed," I said, shuddering at the thought that I might have left it unnoticed. To Karen, the date on the letter was just before my grandfather passed. "I knew you'd definitely notice this letter. Right now, you're probably wondering why I distributed my estate in such a manner. Cash to your sister and an old house and land for you. It may seem like I favored Susan, but that's not the case. Despite any claims of favoritism, I wanted to leave most of my estate to you, who cared for me till the end." I finally understood what had been bothering me. No matter what, Grandpa thought more of me, huh? I reflected. I'm sure I was deeply hurt by Susan's words at that time. I continued to read the letter, feeling a kind of jealousy. But Susan would not be satisfied with a regular division. This child, even as her grandfather. I must admit, she's terribly greedy. Exactly, Grandpa. She even took my boyfriend from me. That's what I want to tell him in my heart. That's why I arranged it this way. If at first glance Susan appears to have received the better deal, she won't pay attention to your share. According to Grandfather's letter, the value of this land in our area is continuously increasing due to ongoing urban development. As of the time I'm writing this, it's not worth Susan's $20 million yet, but the value of this land will surely increase in the future. When I finished conveying the content of the letter, Susan clicked her tongue and said, "Hag. I lived in that house for a while, but when my marriage was settled, I decided to sell the house just like Grandfather's letter said. The land value had risen enough anyway. I'm never lending you money." Susan seemed frustrated. But as if she had a good idea, she said, "Right, if you want, I can give Brian back to you. So help your sister. It's a good deal, right?" At that moment, something snapped inside of me. Enough is enough. You've been taken care of by Grandpa, and yet you haven't shown a hint of gratitude. I despise you for that, and you're not my sister anymore. Besides, I'm already married. I don't need Brian, and I don't even want to see his face. Stay out of my life for good," I said firmly and hung up. I quickly set up call blocking, and my cat on my lap was cowering on the bed. I quickly picked up my cat and said, "I'm sorry." After that, it seems Susan contacted Brian, and they both stormed into our old house. Did they try to return Brian to me? There's a respectable end there now. They must have misunderstood something and were shouting that they were my relatives, even though I just sold the land and had nothing to do with it. It's simple for those two. I sold the land and an end was built. Equals, I must be the owner of the end, I thought. Of course, the staff reported to the police. The two of them were arrested because they had destroyed several items in the end. Furthermore, it was discovered that they had been committing marriage fraud for money in the past. It seems they'll be sent to prison together. I was also questioned by the police, but I was able to prove that I had no involvement quickly as we were estranged and was released. As my husband, who came to pick me up, and I were walking through the station, we heard screaming and turned our gaze. There were Susan and Brian, who looked completely different. Fortunately, they didn't notice us. Both of them had messy hair, worn-out clothes, and looked nothing like the two people I remember. Especially Susan, who never skipped her makeup and fashion, looked even more different. They were probably being moved to a different location. As I watched the two of them, filled with a sense of melancholy, my husband and I locked eyes. I grabbed the hand he extended, and we left the police station. "Are you okay?" My husband, always concerned, looked at me with gentle eyes. I'm okay. I have you in this little one, I said, touching my fairly noticeable belly, and smiled back. In my belly, a new member of our family is growing. Money is important, but there's something even more valuable. That's what I want to teach our child, with my husband by my side. I grew up in a quiet town surrounded by hills and streams. Our house was small and old, but it felt like its own world. My parents weren't rich, but they were kind and wise. My dad worked hard as a carpenter, teaching me about hard work and being humble. My mom, a school teacher, filled our home with books and stories that sparked my imagination. Life in our town was slow and simple. Everyone knew each other, and community events were important to us. I loved this life, finding joy in little things like the smell of rain, the sound of leaves under my feet, and the birds singing in the morning. One day at the library, I met Mark. He was different from anyone I knew, coming from the city. His family was wealthy and influential, but Mark was down to earth and friendly. We started talking, sharing stories about our lives. He told me about city life, the fast pace, and the bright lights. I shared tales of our town, the yearly harvest festival, and our close community. We often met at a park bench by the lake, talking for hours. The lake reflected the sky as we grew closer. Anna, Mark said to me one evening, his voice sounding vulnerable. I've always been around people who care more about money and status. But with you, I found a peace that I never knew existed. You've shown me a different way of life, one that's real and full of warmth. His words touched something deep inside me. Mark, where we come from doesn't define us. It's who we are when we're together that matters. You've opened my eyes to dreams I never thought I could have. As our relationship grew stronger, Mark shared more about his family, especially his mother. She was elegant but had strict expectations. He respected her, but he worried about how she'd react to us. I reached for his hand, feeling it tremble slightly. We'll face that together, I told him. Love isn't about backgrounds or expectations. It's about two people choosing each other against all odds. When Mark proposed, it was simple and heartfelt. No big gestures, just a promise of a life together. Looking into his hopeful, loving eyes, I knew this was just the beginning. The night I was supposed to meet Mark's family, I was nervous. Their grand mansion was a stark contrast to my world. Mark held my hand, giving me a reassuring look. Just be yourself. Anna, just be yourself, Mark said reassuringly as we approached his family's opulent mansion. I smiled weakly, trying to calm my rising anxiety. I just hope your mom doesn't think I'm out of place. Mark sighed, his concern showing in his eyes. Mom can be a bit much. Just remember, I'm here with you. As we entered the lavish dining room, Mark's mother, Moran, greeted us. She was statuesque with an air of seriousness, quickly assessing me with a flicker of disapproval. So this is the young lady who's captured my son's heart. Interesting choice, Mark. Dinner was elaborate, with dishes I couldn't even name. Mark's mother, always the gracious host, offered me a plate with a sly smile. I suppose these dishes might be a bit too sophisticated for your taste, Anna. We can get something simpler if you prefer. I felt embarrassed but managed a polite decline. No thank you, I'm always eager to try new things. As the evening continued, her comments became more pointed. She eyed my simple dress, my neat and thoughtfully chosen outfit, which I had considered appropriate, was met with criticism. Is that what passes for evening wear in your town? She remarked. It must be challenging to find good clothes on a modest budget. Mark tried to change the subject, but his mother persisted. Tell me, Anna, what do your parents do? It's always fascinating to learn about different walks of life. I answered, feeling her judgment weigh heavily on me. My father is a carpenter, and my mother is a schoolteacher. Oh, how quaint, she replied condescendingly. Hard-working people, I'm sure. But I suppose they couldn't offer you much in the way of a financial head start. Throughout the meal, she continued to make jabs at my small-town upbringing, my parents' humble occupations, and even my salary, which she had somehow learned about. Each comment was polite on the surface, but sharp enough to hurt. Mark looked visibly uncomfortable, his attempts to defend me only amusing his mother more. As we left, Mark's father, Daniel, pulled me aside with a kind smile. Anna, you handled yourself well. Don't let her get to you. She'll come around. In the car, Mark apologized profusely. I'm so sorry, Anna. I didn't think she'd be this harsh. I sighed, my voice filled with hurt and determination. It's okay, Mark. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I love you, and that's what matters. That night, as I lay in bed, the sting of his mother's words lingered. But beneath the hurt, a resolve was building. This was more than just about fitting in, it was a test of our love and my strength, and I was ready to face it head on. As the wedding day approached, excitement filled the air, but unfortunately, so did growing tension. Marin took it upon herself to oversee the preparations, seemingly finding pleasure in belittling my ideas and choices at every turn. One afternoon, while discussing wedding plans with Mark and his mother, the topic of the wedding dress came up. I had chosen a simple yet elegant gown that I felt reflected my personality. However, Mark's mother had other ideas. That dress, Anna, it's so plain. Don't you want to make a statement on your big day? After all, you're marrying into the family, she said, her voice condescending. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, giving me a supportive look. Mom, Anna looks beautiful in that dress. It's her choice, and it's perfect. But his mother was relentless. Oh, Mark, let's be realistic. This is a high-profile event. People expect a certain standard. Anna, dear, you should consider something more fitting of our family's status. I tried to keep my voice steady, though her words stung. I appreciate your concern, but I really love my dress. It's special to me. Her response was dismissive. Well, it's your day, I suppose. But remember, it's not just about you. It's about how you represent us, too. As the days went by, her comments became more frequent and hurtful. Moran criticized everything from flower arrangements to menu choices and even the invitations. Each remark was a subtle jab at my background and my inability to meet her lofty standards. Mark and I had many conversations about this, often late into the night. I can't believe she's being so difficult, Mark would say, frustration evident in his voice. I wish she could just see how amazing you are, how you make me happy. I would lie there feeling his arms around me, a mix of love and sorrow in my heart. I knew it wouldn't be easy marrying into his family, but I didn't expect it to be this hard. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning within me. My parents and I had worked hard to make everything perfect, despite the constant criticisms from Moran. As I dressed in my simple but elegant gown, I hoped the day would pass without incident. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with love and heartfelt vows. Mark's eyes shone with affection and promise as we said our I do's. However, looming over the joyous occasion was the apprehension of the reception to follow, particularly the speeches. As expected, Moran took the microphone, commanding the room's attention. The air was thick with expectation as she began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, she started, her voice loud and clear. Today, we'd have gathered to witness the union of my son Mark with Anna. Let's say, a person from a different circle. Whispers spread through the guests, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Moran continued, her words sharp and unyielding. While some may commend Mark for his charitable heart in lifting a beggar from the streets, we must be cautious. It's essential to keep our family's reputation and standards high, not let them be diluted by those who are clearly freeloaders seeking to elevate their status by clinging to a family of higher standing. The room fell into stunned silence. My parents looked at me, their faces a mix of shock and hurt. Mark's face was a mask of disbelief and anger. The guests, a mix of our friends and Mark's high society acquaintances, looked on uncomfortably, unsure of how to react. My heart sank, and a profound shame washed over me. Her words, so cruel in public, were more than just insults. They were a deliberate attempt to shame and belittle me in front of everyone we cared about. As she concluded her speech with a forced toast to our future, the applause was hesitant and muted. The room was enveloped in an awkward silence, the joy of the occasion marred by her venomous words. Mark stood up, his voice trembling slightly. I'm sorry, Anna. This isn't what I wanted. His eyes were apologetic, filled with a mix of love and sorrow. I looked around at the shocked faces of our guests, feeling incredibly humiliated. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air, casting a shadow over what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. The atmosphere at the reception was still tense following the disparaging speech by Mark's mother. When his grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor, a figure of respect and authority in the family, requested the microphone, her poised demeanor and serious expression immediately drew the attention of all the guests. Good evening, she began, her voice clear and firm. Mrs. Eleanor spoke up, addressing the tension from the wedding reception. I have something important to say. Anna, you faced unwarranted criticism today. Criticism that no one deserves, especially not on their wedding day. I looked up in surprise, and Mark beside me appeared equally astonished. Mrs. Eleanor then turned towards Moran. It seems we have forgotten our own past and where we come from. Let me remind everyone here, especially you, that before you were the lady of this house, you were a maid working under this very roof. It was here that you met your husband. A hush fell over the room. Mark's mother's face turned paler, her eyes widening in shock and embarrassment. Mrs. Eleanor continued, her tone unyielding. So for a former maid to stand here and scorn someone for their humble beginnings and modest means is not only ironic but deeply hypocritical. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The room was engulfed in stunned silence, every guest hanging on to Mrs. Eleanor's every word. Guests shifted uncomfortably, and whispers began to circulate. Marin sat motionless, the impact of Mrs. Eleanor's words evident on her face. In this family, we value character over wealth, kindness over status. Anna exemplifies these values, and I am proud to welcome her into our family. Mrs. Eleanor concluded, her gaze softening as she looked at me. The room erupted into applause, a stark contrast to the earlier muted response. Marin sat there completely humbled, her earlier arrogance replaced by a visible sense of shame. To be honest, I didn't feel sorry for her. Mark whispered to me, I never expected Grandma to stand up for us like this. I squeezed his hand, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. She's amazing. The rest of the evening felt lighter, the air cleared by Mrs. Eleanor's candid defense. Guests approached with warm congratulations and sincere smiles. I felt that they were all on my side. It felt damn good. As we left the reception hand in hand, I felt a renewed sense of confidence and belonging. Mrs. Eleanor's words had shifted the dynamics, breaking the tension caused by Moran's cruelty and arrogance. However, in the days after the wedding, there was an unspoken tension that hung over Mark's family like a dense fog. It all came to a head during a family meeting at Mrs. Eleanor's house, where the air was thick with expectation and apprehension. Mrs. Eleanor began without preamble, her voice firm and unwavering. What happened at the wedding cannot be overlooked. The way you spoke to Anna, it was disgraceful. She'd addressed Moran directly, her eyes sharp. Mark's mother, usually composed, looked smaller somehow. Her usual confidence diminished. Eleanor, I've already apologized to Anna, Marin said, her voice tinged with defiance. It's not just about an apology, Mrs. Eleanor retorted. Your actions reflect on this entire family. You've become accustomed to a lifestyle funded by the family's money without appreciating its value. Mark's father nodded in agreement, his expression serious. My mother is right. You've lost sight of what's important. Mrs. Eleanor then laid out her decision, each word deliberate and clear. I've decided to cut off the financial support you've been receiving. It's time you start contributing to this family instead of just taking. You'll need to find a job and learn to live within your means. The shock on Moran's face was evident. She turned to her husband, seeking support. You can't agree with this. She can't just cut me off like this. But Daniel surprised her. I stand with my mother on this. You've gone too far this time. It's for your own good. Moran's eyes filled with anger and disbelief, her usual poise crumbling under the weight of her new reality. Mark, who had been silent, spoke up, his voice steady. Mom, Grandma's decision is harsh, but it's fair. You need to understand the impact of your words and actions. I sat there watching the scene unfold, feeling a mix of sympathy and relief. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, a silent show of support. The meeting ended with Mark's mother in a state of shock, the reality of her situation slowly sinking in. She was obviously used to living at the expense of her family, and the thought of work caused her distress. As we left, Mark leaned in close. I never thought I'd see the day when Mom would be at a loss for words. But maybe this is what she needs to change. I nodded, feeling a cautious hope for the future. Perhaps this will be a new beginning for her, for all of us. The family reckoning had been tough but necessary. It was a pivotal moment that promised to reshape the dynamics within Mark's family, hopefully for the better. The honeymoon was a welcome escape for Mark and me. As we walked along the sandy beaches, the soothing sound of the waves provided a much-needed respite from the recent family turmoil. One evening, as we watched the sunset, Mark wrapped his arm around me. I'm sorry our wedding turned into such a drama, Anna. I wish things had been different. I leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his embrace. It's okay, Mark. It wasn't your fault. What matters is we're together now, away from all that stress. Mark sighed, looking out over the ocean. Yeah, but when we go back, we'll have to face the reality of my mom's situation, Mark said as we prepared to return home from our honeymoon. I nodded, understanding his concern. Maybe this will be a chance for her to grow, to see things from a different perspective. We spent our days exploring and our nights talking about our future. The challenges we had faced seemed to strengthen our bond, reaffirming our love for each other. On our last night as we packed our bags, Mark looked thoughtful. You know, Anna, everything that happened made me realize how important you are to me. I can't imagine going through life with anyone else. I smiled, touched by his words. I feel the same, Mark. We've been through a lot, but it's only made our relationship stronger. We can handle whatever comes our way as long as we're together. As we headed back home, I felt a sense of peace. The honeymoon had not only been a break from the chaos, but also a time for us to solidify our bond, to prepare ourselves for the new chapter in our lives. We were returning to a changed reality, but we were doing it together, stronger and more united than ever. The future was uncertain, but I was ready to face it with Mark by my side. Coming back from our honeymoon, Mark and I were unsure of what awaited us at his family home. The car ride was quiet, both of us lost in thoughts about the new family dynamics. As we arrived, the first thing we noticed was the absence of Mark's mother. Inside, we were greeted by his grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor, who wore a knowing smile. Welcome back, you two. I suppose you're wondering about the changes here, she said, her tone light but with an undercurrent of seriousness. Yes, where's Mom? Mark asked, looking around. Mrs. Eleanor took a deep breath, her smile still in place. Well, after you left, Moran caused quite a scene. She demanded that I restore her financial support. When I refused, she decided to leave. She's now living in a small apartment and from what I hear, is looking for a job. Mark and I exchanged glances, the news sinking in. It was a drastic change from the luxurious life she was used to. And there's more, Mrs. Eleanor continued, leaning in as if to share a secret. Your father is considering a divorce. He's had enough of her antics. Seems like she finally pushed him too far. Mark's expression was one of shock mixed with a hint of relief. I can't believe it. I mean, I knew things would change, but this is more than I expected. I reached out, touching his arm. It's a lot to take in, but maybe this is for the best, a chance for everyone to start fresh on a more honest footing. Dinner that night was an oddly serene affair. The absence of Mark's mother was felt, but not in the way we had anticipated. The conversation was more open, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like there was a real sense of family. As we drove home later that evening, Mark was pensive. I always hoped for a change, but I didn't expect it to happen like this. It's going to be a big adjustment for Mom. I nodded. It's a tough situation, but maybe it's a necessary step for her to grow and for your dad too, to find some peace. The ride home was reflective, both of us contemplating the new reality we were returning to. The family we left before the honeymoon was not the same one we were coming back to. It was a sobering thought, but in many ways a hopeful one. Change, though painful at times, was often the path to something better, and we were ready to face it together.
I just had a baby, and I expect a $5,000 baby shower gift from you. This outrageous message came from Jessica, the awful person who stole Michael from me. She lied about being pregnant to take him away, leading to our divorce. Even though I've tried to move on and have remarried, her presence still disrupts my peace. She hasn't changed and still causes trouble without caring. I can hardly believe she's my real sister. Now that John has seen the message, ignoring it isn't an option. Reluctantly, I agreed to attend the celebration because John suggested we go. He seems to have a plan, and he's a warm and kind person. John hates dishonesty. He's smart and skilled at turning work situations to his advantage. So I trust he has a strategy in mind. She can laugh about it now, but soon she'll have to face the consequences for all her wrongdoings. I've been working as an office assistant in a local company since I graduated from college. I've been dating someone since my college days. Back then, through our club activities. I met Michael Smith, a medical student at the same university. His dad is a renowned allergy specialist, and it seems Michael is aiming to become a doctor too. His father's clinic is super popular, with patients coming from all over the country for treatment. Being the only son of a solo practitioner and heir to a well-known clinic, my first impression was that he was a smart, well-off guy. But as I talked to him, I found he was quite unique, and we both liked the same film director's work. I wanted to get to know him better, so I made the first move. Hey, have you seen the new movie by that director? If not, want to go see it together? A woman who likes those films. That's a bit surprising. Absolutely. I don't have many fans in my circle. I'm so glad I can watch it with you. My efforts paid off, and he began to see me as someone special. Our relationship continued not just through college, but afterwards too, and Michael proposed to me. When I was 25, Michael said, "I'm still learning to be a doctor, but in the future, I want to take over my dad's clinic and be a great doctor. I want you, Naomi, to be there to see it all. Will you marry me?" Of course, I'd be delighted. Let's have a happy life together, I replied. I was on top of the world. I got pregnant right after getting married. Michael would definitely be a great dad. Boy or girl, as long as the baby was healthy, that was all that mattered. Michael was probably just as excited for the birth. But then my happiness shattered. I suffered from severe morning sickness, constantly battling nausea and feeling unwell. I couldn't keep up with my job post-college and had to resign, fighting my morning sickness at home. Had to eat constantly to stave off the nausea. I was surrounded by empty pastry bags where I always sat. I'm home, Naomi. What's happened to this place? It's a mess with all these snacks and bread bags. Michael said, Sorry, I've been too sick to clean up. I replied, You're not working and you've put on so much weight. He said harshly, It's hard without eating. I was always eating because of my morning sickness. Despite being early in my pregnancy, I had gained 22 loaves, not doing housework and just eating. You're like a pig who's given up on being ladylike, he said mockingly. I couldn't believe he could be so cruel. Was my judgment that off? Maybe once the baby was born, Michael would return to his kind self. Held on to that faint hope, but it too would soon crumble. One day, my sister Jessica came to visit. Oh, Naomi, you are here. What a mess, though. Sorry for the mess, I said. That's fine. I'm used to this place like a second home, she replied. There she was, my sister Jessica, appearing before a worn-out me, struggling with morning sickness and feeling awful. Jessica occasionally visits our home, but at that moment, I was too unwell to properly entertain her. Hoping a little chat might distract me, I decided to start a conversation. You know, it looks like the baby in my belly is a girl. I keep thinking about dressing up and going shopping together someday. Wow, I didn't know you were thinking about things like that. Does Michael know it's going to be a girl? Yeah, I told Michael right away. It's a girl. And you know, I dream of wearing matching outfits with my child. Jessica, you've always been so stylish. I'm counting on your advice when the time comes, I said. Then Jessica turned around, smiling meaningfully. That's right. Michael is still a rookie doctor, but he'll eventually take over the family clinic. Poor Michael, having you as a clinic director's wife. Jessica said, Stop it, Jessica. That's too harsh. You really have a sharp tongue. I replied, Jessica is quite sarcastic and sometimes says things that hit hard. As her younger sister, I've gotten used to it over the years, but it can be quite tough when I'm feeling unwell. But Jessica quickly returned to her usual smile and waved her hand. Sorry, I just slipped into my usual mode. So Naomi, anything bothering you lately? Bothering me? Well, Michael's been coming home late lately. He's a doctor, so it's unavoidable. But he seems to be at the hospital all the time, even on weekends. We hardly have time to talk these days. I explained. I see. Well, it's no surprise considering someone like you claims to be a doctor's wife, Jessica said with an icy smile. I felt the chill at Jessica's words. What do you mean? What I came to talk to you about today, Jessica said, glancing toward the living room door. Then entering from the living room door was Michael. Michael, did you get off work early from the hospital today? I need to talk to you. Let's get a divorce, Michael said abruptly. What kind of joke is this? What do you mean? I couldn't understand what Michael was saying at all. I knew he wasn't the type to make such a terrible joke, especially since we had been together since college and I was carrying his child. See, your beloved husband is saying this. You should listen to his request and let go quickly, Jessica interjected. Michael looked at me awkwardly. I can't see you as a woman anymore after you kept eating and gaining weight. But this is morning sickness. I feel sick if I don't eat, I protested. Jessica looked triumphantly at me. That's the way it is. And the baby in your belly, being a girl, she won't be the heir to the Smith Clinic. But in my belly, I carried Michael's child. A suitable heir, I retorted. I felt a sinking feeling as I watched Jessica lovingly stroke her belly. I'm 3 months pregnant, and it's a boy, according to the tests. You can't be serious, Michael. What are you doing while I'm going through all this pain? That's why all your excuses, quitting your job, and just eating all the time, are unacceptable. I'm tired of watching you lying around, constantly eating snacks. I take care of myself so I don't have morning sickness, even when pregnant. I won't lose my self-control and eat like a pig, unlike you, Jessica said, her words cutting deep. I was at a loss for words, seeing Jessica's smug face and Michael looking down at the floor, guilt-ridden. Jessica being pregnant with a boy. I didn't know, but as an heir, I want a son. I prefer a beautiful wife like Jessica over a woman who keeps gaining weight without restraint. Michael confessed. That's just wanting an heir, and a beautiful wife is your own selfish desire, isn't it? I challenge. I'll pay alimony, so let's part without any fuss, Michael said, apologizing. Seeing Michael apologize, I knew that things could never go back to how they were after that. Michael and I divorced, and I gave birth to our daughter as a single mother. His promise of alimony turned out to be just words with no actual payment. Post-delivery, I had to work to survive since I had no one to rely on. Not knowing what else to do, took a job at a nearby department store that's hiring. Life is unpredictable. My hard work and character caught the attention of someone. It was John Johnson, a well-regarded manager in the external sales department. Tough day. You're always working hard, John said. Thanks. I'm about to finish up soon. Are you done for the day, John? Yeah. Oh, there's this great Italian place nearby I want you to try, Naomi. And this, it's a little gift for your daughter. Through light conversations every time we met, we were drawn to each other and began dating, which led to our remarriage. Naomi, I might be a guy 20 years older than you, but I sincerely want to make you and your daughter happy. Will you marry me? John asked. Are you sure about me? I'd be delighted. I replied. Life after remarriage was truly blissful. A gentle husband, my daughter, and I lived a peaceful life. However, I failed to notice the ominous footsteps creeping closer to our tranquil days. One day, John had work, but I was off. Just as I thought of having a leisurely tea, an email arrived. It was from Jessica, and the content was shocking. A baby is born. I'm expecting a $5,000 baby shower gift. A sigh escaped me. 5 years ago, Jessica had an affair with Michael and snatched him away. Now this, and $5,000 for a baby shower gift, seemed too much. I couldn't forget that day, Nor could I even if I tried. The expressions on Jessica and Michael's faces back then, the way they sought happiness together, ignoring my suffering from morning sickness, was unforgivable. I was at a loss on how to respond to Jessica's email. Then John returned from work, noticing something was off, and asked with concern, "What's wrong, Naomi? You look pale." "Oh, John, it's a message from my sister. She had a baby. The sister who married your ex-husband, Michael. Yeah, I don't want to see her face or hear from her. Plus, she's asking for a $5,000 baby shower gift." I explained. As John listened and looked at my phone, he suddenly said, "Wait, this Jessica Smith name. You know her. I didn't mention her when we got married because I didn't want to remember. Yeah, I've never been introduced to her by you, but I wonder." I replied. John pondered while looking at the email, seeming to recall something. "We didn't properly greet her during our wedding, so let's visit her now. Also, I just remembered something I needed to do back at the department store." He then hurriedly prepared to leave. "Going back to the department store now. Sorry, there's something I need to do." A few hours later, John returned with a thick file. "Is it okay if we visit your sister, Jessica, 2 weeks from now on Sunday? We both have the day off, and I'd like her to meet my parents and cousins too." "Your parents and cousins too?" I questioned. "Jessica loves being the center of attention, so she'll probably be fine," John replied. "But why?" "I heard your ex-husband, Michael, is famous for allergy treatment. My family has a history of allergies. I thought we might get some good advice," John's father explained. I remember hearing from friends that Michael had taken over his father's allergy clinic. Michael's dad was an authority on allergy treatment, and Michael became an allergist too. A friend told me, "Okay, I'll contact Jessica," I replied. Jessica quickly agreed when I contacted her. "I want to see the baby, and will bring a gift. Can I bring some relatives too? They really want to meet you." "Of course, the more guests, the more gifts. Looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks on Sunday," Jessica replied. 2 weeks later, on Sunday, I visited Jessica's house with John, his parents, and relatives, including his cousins, in a quiet residential area. Her stylish house stood next to the clinic, its white walls gleaming. John's parents and relatives were surprised by its luxurious design, excited to meet the renowned allergist. "Welcome. I've been waiting for you," Jessica greeted us. "Long time no see, Jessica. You look happy," I remarked. "Of course. I was worried about my first childbirth, but it all worked out in the end," Jessica replied. I felt something off in Jessica's words. "First childbirth. Didn't you say you were pregnant with a boy before?" "Oh, did I not tell you?" "I miscarried that time, so this is my first," Jessica explained. John, standing beside me, nodded meaningfully. Seeing John's face, Jessica started to tremble. "Oh, hello. Nice to meet you," she greeted John's parents and relatives. "Hello, you must be Naomi's sister. I heard a bit about the miscarriage." "Yes, but I don't want to remember the miscarriage," I replied. Jessica turned her face away in a huff and started to walk off. "Sorry about that." "Oh, there's something I wanted to give you, Jessica," John said, holding out an envelope. "What? Something for me?" Jessica exclaimed, taking the envelope. It was pastel-colored with the word "Congratulations" written on it, thick enough to be noticeable even from the side. "Here you go. I wanted to give this to Jessica personally." "Got it right, just what I've been waiting for," John said. I glanced at John and whispered to him, "Hey, we aren't rich, and we don't have to give Jessica the $5,000 she asked for." But John, unfazed, cut me off. "It's fine. Trust me, you'll understand if you watch." While we were talking about the envelope, Jessica had already started opening it. I need to check if it's exactly $5,000. With this thickness, it might even be $10,000. I overheard Jessica say. The cute envelope was torn open with a ripping sound, and Jessica's face clouded over the moment she opened it. What's this? John stepped forward with a salesperson's smile to explain. Mrs. Jessica Smith, this is a detailed statement of your purchases at the department store over the past 5 years. You said to put it on my tab, and this is the amount you've accumulated to date. What are you talking about? I don't know anything about this, Jessica exclaimed as she looked at the statement. The statement Jessica held listed names of luxury watches and brand bags. Seeing the 5-digit figure in the amount column, I was in disbelief. Indeed, Mr. Michael Smith himself and his parents are valued customers with an external sales card contract. However, with such a high amount, we needed to confirm just to be sure. My husband is the famous allergist Michael Smith. As the wife of the clinic's director, using 1 or 2 external sales cards is nothing, Jessica argued. Is that so? Also, there's something else I personally wanted to verify. John paused before continuing. About 5 years ago, we had complaints about a customer flaunting their external sales card and making extremely unpleasant remarks. Do you know anything about this? What's that? What does it matter? Jessica questioned. Since we had several complaints, I checked with the staff who were nearby at the time. The content of the conversation was so terrible that the staff remembered. John explained. It was clear. Glancing sideways, I saw Jessica's expression harden. The staff said the conversation was about stealing someone's husband, who happens to be her brother-in-law. Could it be? John asked. Yes, that's right. And she bragged about using a fake pregnancy to break them up. Laughing loudly, she talked about how she lied about miscarrying like it was some kind of heroic tale. I explained. That's when I realized. That time, Jessica's claim of being pregnant with a boy, that heir, was all a lie to snatch Michael. Of course, there was no pregnancy, so no morning sickness or changes in her body shape. I concluded. What are you saying? That story was about me. Jessica protested. Matching the complaints with the external sales card, your name, Jessica Smith, came up. I can't believe this. You were marrying into a doctor's family, becoming the clinic director's wife. I couldn't stand it. I had to do whatever it took to tell Michael that I was the right one for him. I said, overwhelmed with disbelief. While I was stunned, the door opened. What's this all about? Explain yourself, Jessica, Michael demanded. Since when have you been here? I asked. From the beginning. I came back to get something I forgot and found the external sales card statement. And now I hear the pregnancy 5 years ago was all a lie. Jessica confessed. You trapped me. Michael shouted, his anger boiling over. Jessica began to laugh. So what? You got a beautiful wife, and we have a child now. So it's fine, right? Don't joke with me. I can't live with a liar like you. Let's get a divorce, Michael declared. You can't be serious. What about our child? Don't you feel sorry for them? Jessica pleaded. Pushing her away, Michael glared at Jessica with a furious expression. I can't live with a liar and reckless spender like you. It's not good for the child either. We're getting a divorce, and I'm taking custody. Are you kidding me? Do you have any idea what I went through to give birth to this child? This child needs to become a doctor in the future to support us. You're just thinking about yourself. Jessica argued. There's no point in talking about this now. Let's handle the rest through a lawyer. Michael concluded. The relatives who came along, hoping to get some effective medicine from the famous allergist, were frozen in shock at this chaotic scene. I was so embarrassed to admit that she was my sister. Afterwards, Michael got a good lawyer specializing in divorce and successfully got divorced and won custody. Meanwhile, Jessica, who had been shopping to her heart's content on credit using the external sales card during her marriage, was now being chased for repayments. Hey, if your husband hadn't brought that statement, I'd still be the clinic director's wife. I'm being hounded for repayments now. Help your sister out in a pinch, will you? Jessica pleaded. Why should I? You brought this on yourself, didn't you? And you should pay for your own shopping, I retorted to Jessica's plea for help. Unexpectedly, I got a message from Michael via social media. Hey, can we start over? If Jessica hadn't lied about having a boy 5 years ago, we would have been fine as a couple. I want to see our daughter too. Had forgotten how he left me suffering with morning sickness and mocked me, then cheated on me. After 5 years of no contact, the last thing I wanted was to see his face again. Michael seemed to be struggling to keep the clinic he inherited from his father running. But you can't stop gossip. Due to the infidelity rumors, patients stopped coming. The Smith Clinic, which Michael inherited, had a 1-star rating and unbelievably bad reviews on a hospital review site. It seemed only a matter of time before he would have to close the clinic he was so fixated on inheriting. Ironically, he was so obsessed with having a male there. My husband, daughter, and I continued to live happily as a family. Naomi, are you ready? Shall we head out soon? John asked. Yes, I was just remembering how delicious the spaghetti you brought me from that restaurant was back when I was a single mother. You used to order from a restaurant for takeout as a way to approach me. I reminisced. Back then, my daughter was small. And since we weren't dating, we never ate at the restaurant, just as colleagues. You had just gotten divorced and were having a hard time, right? John recalled. I thought even a little bit of delicious food could bring you happiness. It was your kindness that drew me to you. The dish that brought us together back then. It was just my daughter and me eating takeout, but now it's different. I'm happy that we can eat together as a family. Who would have thought that a day like this, going out with you and our daughter, would come? I said, feeling grateful for the happiness we now shared.
I'm Melina, and up until my 30th birthday, the most exciting thing in my life was when the accounting firm I worked for switched from PCs to Macs. Not exactly thrilling news. Then, at a friend's birthday party, everything changed. That night, I stood in a crowded living room, holding a soda and feeling awkward in my too tight dress. The music was deafening, making it impossible to talk, but perfect for catching Mark's attention. He was noticeably taller than most, and he confidently strolled over. Hey, you're Melina, right? His voice cut through the booming bass. Yeah, and you are. I sipped my drink, trying to seem calm. I've seen you around. Mind if I join you? He didn't wait for my answer, just positioned himself beside me. Not at all, I replied, my voice drowned out by the music. So, Melina, what brings you here tonight? He leaned in casually, but his eyes were intense. Just here for Sarah's birthday. You know her long? I asked. Yeah, we went to college together. She keeps inviting me to these things, he shrugged. I get it. I work with her. She's kind of hard to say no to. I chuckled. An accountant, right? He nodded knowingly. Yep, numbers are my game. I joked that I usually found nothing funny about spreadsheets. Sounds thrilling, he grinned, and I couldn't tell if he was teasing me or not. Oh, absolutely. It's all wild parties and high stakes in the accounting world. We laughed again. And that's where it left off. After feeling the ease of talking to someone genuinely interested in me, I experienced a new, exciting, and slightly scary feeling. Mark suggested we step outside for some fresh air, and I eagerly agreed. Outside, away from the noise, the cool air was refreshing. I asked him, "What's a guy like you doing in a place like this?" I was trying to sound smooth, but I felt nervous. He replied with a smile, "Just looking for a good time, I guess. And maybe someone cool to hang out with." His smile was warm and genuine. We talked about everything and nothing, movies, books we liked, and how he was into graphic design but stuck in a corporate job he didn't love. It felt like we'd known each other for years. As the night wound down, he asked for my number. Hesitant at first, I eventually agreed. It felt right. The days after Mark's call flew by in a blur. Before I knew it, I was getting ready for our first date. My nerves were all over the place. I didn't have much experience with this sort of thing. I chose a simple blue dress, nothing fancy. Mark picked me up at exactly 7 o'clock. His car was clean and well kept, nothing flashy, but it suited him perfectly. As I got in, he flashed me a smile that made my cheeks turn as red as a tomato. "You look great, Melina," he said. "Thanks," I mumbled, trying to hide my embarrassment. "You look nice too." We went to a cozy Italian restaurant he knew. The food smelled amazing, but my stomach was doing flips. We ordered pasta, hit with some fancy sauce and meat with plain old marinara. "So, Melina, tell me something about you that no one else knows," he asked, expertly twirling spaghetti onto his fork. I chuckled nervously. "Well, I'm pretty boring, but I guess not everyone knows I can solve a Rubik's Cube in under 1 minute." "Really? That's pretty cool. You'll have to show me sometime," he said, raising his eyebrows. "Sure," I said, starting to relax a bit. "What about you? Any hidden talents?" "I make a mean breakfast burrito," he boasted with a grin. "Best you'll ever have." "I'll take your word for it. Maybe you can prove it sometime," I teased. The conversation flowed, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Mark and I saw each other constantly. He would come over after work, or we'd meet for lunch near his office. He showed me his favorite spots around town, little nooks I'd never noticed before. It was like seeing the city for the first time. Things got serious when he invited me to meet his parents, Jack and Mary. They lived in a small but cozy house filled with photos and knickknacks. Mary hugged me the moment we walked in. "We've heard so much about you, dear," Mary said, squeezing my shoulders. "Mark, she's lovely." "Thanks, Mom," Mark replied, clearly pleased. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation didn't stop. "So, Melina, Mark tells us you're an accountant." "That must be interesting," Jack said, passing me the potatoes. "It has its moments," I replied. "Mostly just numbers, but I like the order of it." "And how's your family?" Mary asked, genuinely interested. "They're good, thanks. My dad's a businessman, always busy, but he's been really supportive of me." It was all happening fast, but it felt right. It was as if everything in my life had been leading up to this meeting. Mark feeling like someone finally saw me for who I was, not just some plain Jane accountant. One evening, a few months into our whirlwind romance, we were walking along the riverbank. The city lights reflected off the water, creating a picturesque scene. "Melina, I've been thinking," Mark started, stopping and facing me. "Yeah?" I asked, my heart starting to race. "I don't want to wait any longer. I know this is fast, but will you marry me?" Just like that, my world changed. No hesitation, no doubt, just a simple "Yes, Mark, I'll marry you." The whirlwind didn't stop there. Soon after, I introduced Mark to my father, who took to Mark immediately, appreciating his straightforward manner and obvious affection for me. "He's a good man, Melina," Dad said, giving his approval, which meant the world to me. So we got married. It was a modest wedding, nothing too extravagant, but it was perfect for us. I even found myself loving the way I looked in my wedding dress, something I'd never imagined. Smiling wide, I posted photos on my social media, sharing my joy with friends and family. After the wedding, life didn't slow down. It picked up pace. Mark and I barely had time to savor our newlywed bliss before he suggested something big. "Hey, Melina, I've been thinking," he said one evening as we unpacked another box of wedding gifts in our cramped apartment. "How about we move in with my folks?" I paused, a coffee mug in hand. "Live with your parents?" He nodded, looking serious. "Yeah, they're not getting any younger, and I feel better if we were around to help out. Plus, it would save us some money on rent." It made sense, I guess. Moving in with the in-laws was like something out of a sitcom. I couldn't shake the feeling that it might not be what his parents really wanted. Mark reassured me, though. "Absolutely," he said confidently. "Mom's been hinting about it ever since we got engaged. Come on, it'll be good." So 2 weeks later, there we were, pulling up to his parents' house with our lives packed into boxes. Mary, Mark's mom, was already waving from the porch before we even got out of the car. "Oh, Melina, we're so thrilled to have you both here," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that was a bit too tight. Jack, Mark's dad, clapped him on the back. "Welcome home, son. And you too, Melina." The house was cozy, filled with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum from the 1970s. I tried to keep a smile on my face, but I was already missing our little apartment. Mark sensed my hesitation. "It's going to be great, you'll see," he whispered as we carried boxes inside. The first few days were an adjustment. Mary was constantly hovering, always popping into our room to ask if we needed anything. "Just making sure you're comfortable," she chirped, while I tried not to cringe at the invasion of privacy. One evening, we all sat down for dinner: Mark, me, Jack, and Mary. The conversation was painfully mundane until Mark dropped another bomb. "So the house needs some major repairs," he announced casually between bites of meatloaf. "Repairs?" I choked on my mashed potatoes. "Yeah, the roof's a mess, and the plumbing's from the dark ages," he said. Jack nodded solemnly. "We were thinking," Mark continued, avoiding my gaze, "that maybe we could all chip in for the costs." I glanced at Mary, who suddenly seemed very interested in her plate. "All of us?" I stammered. "I just got a pay cut at work," Mark muttered, "so I'm a bit strapped at the moment." There it was. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "I'll see what I can do," I managed to say, though I wanted to say much more. Mary perked up, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Melina, that would be so helpful. You're such an angel." The next few weeks were a blur of contractors and repairs. I wrote checks and smiled through gritted teeth as Mary gushed about how wonderful the house was looking. Jack slapped me on the back. "You're really part of the family now, Melina." "Part of the family?" "Sure, the part that pays for everything." One particularly grueling day, after yet another round of expensive decisions, I collapsed on our bed, exhausted. Mark came in and sat beside me. "Thanks for handling all this, Melina," he said, sounding almost sincere. "It's fine," I lied, staring at the ceiling. "Just didn't realize how much it would be." He squeezed my hand, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. "It'll all be worth it. This is for our future, right?" Mark reassured me one night. "Our future," I echoed, not quite sure whose future we were building anymore. As I lay there, listening to Mark's steady breathing, I couldn't help but wonder if moving in was the right decision. But there was no going back now. I was in this deep, and I had to see it through, whatever the cost. After the renovations, the house looked great, like something out of a magazine. Honestly, despite the financial strain, I felt a bit of pride looking around. We decided to throw a small dinner party to celebrate, just the four of us. That's when everything took an unexpected turn. We were in the middle of dinner, laughing and sharing stories, when Mary suddenly got quiet. The room felt heavy all of a sudden. She looked at Jack, then at us, her eyes tearful. "We need to tell you both something important," she said, her voice shaky. Mark and I exchanged looks. "What's going on?" I asked, my stomach tightening. Jack took a deep breath. "The house, it's heavily mortgaged. We owe $200,000, and the bank could take it away if we don't settle the debt in 2 months. My fork clattered to my plate. "What do you mean?" "All the repairs we just paid for." Mary started sobbing. "We were ashamed, and we thought we could manage it. But after the repairs and everything, there's just no way." I felt like I was in a bad dream. All the money, all the effort, it was for a house that wasn't even secure. "So what are you saying now?" My voice was sharper than I intended. "Well," Mark started, avoiding my eyes, "I was hoping, maybe, Melina, you could talk to your father." "Are you serious?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Ask my dad for $200,000. It's just, after his help, the house would be secure for us, for our future," Mark pleaded. Mary's sobbing grew louder, making me feel like the villain in this crazy drama. "Please, Melina, it's our home. We've spent decades in this house." I was furious, but the tears and pleading wore me down. "I'll think about it," I finally muttered, feeling trapped. The next day, I called my dad hesitantly, explaining the situation. To my surprise, he agreed to help, but on one condition. "I'll give the money, Melina, but only with a formal agreement, a receipt. I want everything documented." When I relayed this to Mark, he wasn't happy. "Why does it have to be so formal? Can't you just trust us?" "It's $200,000, Mark. It's a lot of money, and he's just being cautious, I argued, feeling the divide between us grow. He'll get his paperwork, Mark muttered, clearly annoyed. The paperwork was drawn up, and the money was transferred. Mary and Jack were relieved, constantly thanking me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed between Mark and me. The future that once seemed so clear was now clouded with uncertainty. When I thought my life couldn't get any darker, tragedy struck with brutal suddenness. "Melina, it's your Aunt Judith." Her voice came through the line shaky and choked. "Your dad, he had a heart attack. It's bad." My heart dropped to my stomach. "What? How is he?" "He didn't make it, honey. I'm so sorry." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "No, that can't be right," I mumbled, feeling numb. I hung up and turned to find Mark standing in the doorway. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. "My dad, he's gone," I managed to say before everything inside me broke, and I started sobbing. Mark came over and put his arm around me, but it felt like being hugged by a stranger. "I'm sorry, Melina," he said, and it sounded sincere, but I was too lost in my grief to really hear him. Exhausted from another long day of funeral planning and negotiations with the agency, I came home earlier than usual. I expected the house to be quiet, but as I inserted my key into the front door, I heard voices from the living room. It was Mark, his tone dripping with frustration and disgust, talking to his parents. "I can't do this anymore. Living with her is driving me nuts. She's just, oh, it's too much," Mark complained. His mom, usually so sweet and understanding, replied in a stern whisper, "You have to hold on a bit longer, Mark. We need to figure out what to do with those receipts your father-in-law had. Melina has them now. The sooner I get out, the better. I'll grab those receipts and destroy them, and then I'll start all over again with that rich beauty I told you about." Mark's voice was cold, calculated. I felt a chill run down my spine. Here I was, mourning my father, while the people I lived with were plotting behind my back. They weren't the loving family I thought I married into. Instead, they saw me as nothing more than a means to an end, a way to secure their financial troubles. Rage mixed with shock, but I knew I had to keep my cool, so I slammed the door loudly as if I had just come in, disrupting their scheming. "Oh, Melina, you're back early. How did everything go with the funeral plans?" Mary's voice shifted instantly to one of concern, her eyes wide with faint innocence. I forced a smile, my stomach turning. "It's all coming together. Thanks for asking." As I spoke, I could see the quick glance they shot each other, their faces a mask of fake concern. It made my skin crawl, knowing their true colors. But I realized that showing my cards now wouldn't help. I needed to be smart. I needed to protect what was mine and possibly even get some justice for their deceit. The funeral was somber, the air heavy with grief and murmured condolences. But as the ceremony wrapped up and we returned to Mark's parents' house, the true colors of the family I married into began to show. As we gathered in the living room sipping lukewarm coffee, Mark's demeanor shifted. His usually charming facade crumbled away, revealing something more sinister. With a cold laugh, he looked straight at me and dropped the bomb. "Melina, pack your things. You need to get out. I got someone else now, someone better." His words should have been like a slap. I pretended to be stunned, but before I could respond, Mary chimed in with a snide giggle. "We've really had enough of you, dear. We only put up with you for your money." "What about the house?" I asked, feigning innocence. "The house that I paid to fix? The $200,000 I poured into it?" Mary laughed harder, as if I told the best joke of the year. "Oh, sweetie, this house is ours. You're nothing here." Mark's smirk widened. "And those receipts you're so proud of? Found them in your dad's house and burned them. They're gone." For a moment, I let them believe they had won, but then I couldn't help it. I burst into laughter. My reaction confused them, their smiles faltering. "Why are you laughing? What's so funny?" Mark demanded. I wiped a tear from my eye, still chuckling. "You three are just pathetic. You think you're so clever. The receipts you destroyed? They were copies. The real ones are safe with my lawyer." The color drained from both their faces. Mark's arrogance turned to panic. "You can't prove anything," he stammered. "I can, I will," I shot back, my voice steady and firm. "Now I want my money back, all of it, or my next call is to the police." Mark and Jack looked at each other, their earlier confidence replaced by fear. Jack, usually bold and brash, began to plead. "Melina, please, let's talk about this. We can sort something out." With the truth now out in the open and the leverage squarely in my hands, the negotiations with Mark and his parents dragged on longer than I expected. It was clear they were trying every angle to sway the terms in their favor, but I wasn't about to budge. "Look, it's simple," I stated firmly during one of our numerous discussions at their now legally mine kitchen table. "The house gets transferred to my name in exchange for the IOUs. That's the deal. No more games." Finally, they relented. We all agreed that the best course of action was to make everything official and legal. I insisted that everything be documented by a lawyer and confirmed with the proper papers. At the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was tense as documents were signed and notarized. I watched closely as each signature was applied, ensuring there was no room for further deceit. Once everything was finalized, I collected the documents related to the transfer and turned to Mark's mother, who looked deflated yet somehow still carried a hint of her former haughtiness. "I'll be keeping these in a safe place," I said, holding up the papers, before slipping them into a folder, just to ensure no one is tempted to pull any stunts. With the legalities handled, the divorce proceedings were straightforward. Mark was quiet, his earlier arrogance nowhere to be seen. When the final papers were signed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. A chapter closed. On the day they moved out, I stood on the porch of my now fully owned house and watched Mark, his mom, and dad carry their belongings to a rental van. Their movements were slow, the mood somber. I couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This wasn't how I imagined my marriage ending, but under the circumstances, it was the best possible outcome. After everything settled down and I began to enjoy my newfound peace, word got back to me through friends about Mark and his predicament. Apparently, the grass wasn't greener on the other side. His mistress had dumped him not long after our divorce, and his parents. They were now crammed into a tiny apartment, a stark downgrade from the comfortable house they once had. It seemed karma had caught up with them quicker than I expected. Despite their situation, they started reaching out to me, bombarding me with calls and messages, probably hoping to weasel their way back into my life or at least my house. But I was done with their deceit. I blocked their numbers without a second thought and blacklisted them on all social media. It was liberating, cutting the final threads that connected us. One afternoon, as I was enjoying a quiet moment with a book in my living room, a knock came at my door. Peering through the peephole, I saw Mark standing there, a pathetic figure holding a bouquet of flowers. The audacity of it made me scoff. Opening the door, I couldn't help but laugh outright at the sight of him. "Really, Mark? Flowers?" He shuffled uncomfortably, the bouquet seeming to wilt along with his spirits. "Melina, I have realized so many things. I was wrong, terribly wrong. Remember when you told me I disgusted you?" I interrupted, leaning against the doorframe, not bothering to hide my amusement at his discomfort. "What changed, Mark?" "Run out of options." He looked down, shame clear on his face. I made mistakes, but I'm here to make things right." I shook my head, almost feeling sorry for him, almost. "You're not here to make things right, Mark. You're just desperate to get back to your comfortable life. But guess what? That life doesn't exist anymore, not for you." His face fell, and he took a step back as if my words were physical blows. "Melina, please, save it," I cut him off sharply. "I want you to leave. Don't come back here. We're done, forever." Mark stood there for a second longer, his hope visibly crumbling. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Returning to my book, I smiled to myself. The quiet of the house wrapped around me like a comforting blanket, a stark contrast to the chaos that once reigned here. I was finally at peace, living life on my terms, and no bouquet of flowers or sweet talk could disrupt that. I was truly finally free. When I was young, my mom used to tell me stories about my grandpa. She said he started with nothing and built a successful business that could have set us up for life. But we never got any of that money. I didn't really understand why until I got older and learned about his will and everything. "Aliza, your grandpa was a tough man," my mom said one cold evening as we sat at our small kitchen table with cups of lukewarm tea. The heater was broken again, and the landlord wasn't quick to fix things. He believed only in earning money, not giving it away. "Why did he cut us off then? Didn't he trust you to manage his money?" I asked, trying not to sound bitter. Mom sighed, her eyes following the steam from her cup. It wasn't about me managing it. He had this strange idea. He made a will that only left his money to someone who made a big success on their own. Like $500,000 in their own business. That's just mean, I muttered. The idea sounded crazy, again set by a man who cared more about money than his family. It was his way or no way, Mom continued. When I argued with him, he practically disowned me. He said if I was any good, I'd earn my way without his help. It felt so unfair. We were struggling to save every penny while someone else out there was enjoying what should have been ours. Ever since I was a kid, I was good at finding ways to make money. I'd set up a lemonade stand at the local golf course on hot summer days, shouting 50 cents a cup to thirsty golfers passing by. You sure know how to hustle, kiddo, an old golfer named Hank once told me, laughing as he handed me his change. Keep that up and you'll be a tycoon one day. I grinned and pocketed the coins. Just saving up for something big, I'd say. My mind was always on the next big thing, and it wasn't just about lemonade. I used to make homemade necklaces and bracelets by stringing beads together from the dollar store. I sold them wherever I could, neighborhood block parties, school events, and even in the front yard during garage sales. Trading and selling didn't just feel fun. It felt like something I was meant to do. Elisa's got her own little business empire going. My mom would joke to her friends, but there was a hint of pride in her voice that made me stand a little taller. But it was sewing that really took off for me. When I managed to buy an old sewing machine from a garage sale, it felt like the best gift ever. Teaching myself to sew wasn't easy. The machine was temperamental, and the online tutorials were confusing, especially with the internet cutting in and out. But I stuck with it. Soon, I was turning plain thrift store clothes into stylish outfits. One day as Sarah caught me at my locker, she sneered, "Is that the same shirt you wore last week? Looks different, doesn't it?" Gave it a little makeover, I replied casually, slamming my locker shut. You should try it sometime, might improve your attitude. She scoffed and started to walk away, but a couple of other girls lingered. That was really cool what you did with your shirt. Could you do mine? One of them asked shyly. Sure thing. Bring it tomorrow, I replied, my heart swelling with pride. Word got around, and soon I was taking custom orders. It wasn't just pocket money anymore. It was a real business. People paid good money for unique clothes, and I was happy to provide. One sunny afternoon, I took my latest creations to the local street fair. I set up a rickety table, laid out my garments, and waited nervously. You think people will buy these? Mike, my friend, asked skeptically, eyeing the passers-by. They'd be crazy not to, I shot back confidently. And buy they did. My table was swarmed. I barely had time to collect the money and hand over the clothes. Amidst the chaos, a guy approached with his car keys. Jack jingled his car keys in his hand, approaching me at my stall. Hey, my car broke down a block from here. Saw your stall. This stuff yours? He asked, nodding towards my makeshift display. Yeah, all made by me. You need something to pass the time while waiting for a tow. I joked, handing him a shirt. He laughed genuinely, head thrown back. Actually, I was wondering if you do men's stuff too. Sure do, I replied, pulling out a few pieces I'd experimented with. He looked them over, then at me with a spark of interest. You've got talent. Ever think of making this a real business? Every day, I said, not missing a beat. His smile widened. I'm Jack, by the way. Eliza, I said, shaking his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another sale. This felt like a doorway swinging wide open. As the day wound down, I counted the cash, a sense of accomplishment washing over me. This was it. I was making it happen one stitch at a time. I told you they love your stuff, Mike said, helping me pack up. Yes, you were right, I admitted, unable to keep the grin off my face. Looks like I might just make that $500,000 mark after all. After meeting Jack at the fair, things moved faster than I expected. He wasn't like the guys I knew. He came from money. But he had a way of making you forget about that when you were with him. He had this laid-back vibe, always laughing, always making plans. We started seeing each other more, and it wasn't long before we were seriously dating. One day, he said, Eliza, I think it's time you met my parents. The thought alone made my stomach churn. I knew his folks came from old money, the kind that looked down on people like me. Are you sure? I asked, my voice tense. I don't think they'll like me much. Jack laughed it off. They'll love you. Don't worry so much. The drive over to Jack's parents' house felt like the longest ride of my life. Jack kept talking about mundane stuff, probably trying to ease the tension, but my stomach was in knots. We turned into a long driveway, and there it was, a massive house that looked more like a museum than a home. We walked up to the grand entrance, and the door swung open before we could even knock. There stood Jack's mom, Mrs. Thompson, dressed impeccably in a way that made me feel underdressed instantly, despite my careful choice of outfit. "Jack, darling," she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug, then turned to me with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you must be Eliza. We've heard so much about you." Her words sounded warm, but her tone was anything but. I forced a smile. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Thompson." Jack led me inside, and that's when Mr. Thompson appeared, a tall, stern-looking man with a firm handshake that felt more like a test than a greeting. "Eliza, a pleasure," he said, his voice deep and unemotional. We moved into the living room, which was as grand and cold as the rest of the house. Everything felt stiff and formal. We made small talk, or at least they did. I mostly nodded and smiled, feeling out of my depth. Dinner was served in a dining room straight out of a magazine, with crystal and fine china that looked like it should be locked up in a display case, not used for eating. We sat down, and that's when the real interrogation, the encounter with Jack's parents, was tense from the start. Mr. Thompson, eyeing me like I was a problem, began with a pointed question. "So, Eliza, Jack tells us you're into fashion design." "Yes, I run a small business designing and selling clothing," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. Self-made then. "How entrepreneurial," he commented dryly, his tone more critical than complimentary. Mrs. Thompson chimed in, her smile feeling insincere. "And your family, dear? What do they do?" "Well, it's just me and my mom. She's a nurse," I said, feeling the weight of each word. "I see," Mrs. Thompson replied, exchanging a glance with her husband. The conversation stumbled along until coffee was served, and then Mrs. Thompson's polite facade dropped. "Eliza, I must be honest. We have certain hopes for Jack, and his partner's background is important to us. It's essential for maintaining the family's reputation and legacy," she said flatly. "Well, it's clear you've accomplished quite a bit despite your background, but I don't think you're suitable for our son, I'm afraid," she concluded abruptly, putting down her fork and leaving the room without another word. I sat there stunned, feeling like I'd been slapped. Jack was quick to comfort me, embarrassed by his parents' behavior. "Eliza, please don't take it to heart. She's just set in her ways." Despite Jack's reassurances, the evening left a cold shadow over what should have been a happy milestone. The engagement happened, but the chill from his parents was something I couldn't shake off. A few weeks after our engagement, Mrs. Thompson called me. Her voice was formal. "Eliza, I'd like you to come over. We need to discuss something important." When I arrived, both of Jack's parents were waiting. The house felt colder than ever. Mrs. Thompson wasted no time, her tone sharp and unwelcoming. "Eliza, we've looked into your background thoroughly. It's clear you come from a very different world than ours," she began. "It's clear you're hunting for wealth, climbing through our son, but we won't allow our family fortune to be jeopardized," she continued, her words stinging. Before I could react, Mrs. Thompson slid a stack of papers across the table towards me. "Since I can't convince Jack to rethink this marriage, you'll need to sign these," she said flatly. I picked up the papers. They were a prenuptial agreement. As I read through it, I realized I wouldn't lay claim to any of Jack's wealth, and neither would any children we might have. Without hesitating, I signed them. "I'm not marrying Jack for his money," I said firmly, handing the signed papers back to her. Mrs. Thompson looked taken aback, and even Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, surprised by my quick compliance. Leaving their house, I felt a mix of relief and resentment. At home, I told Jack everything. He laughed it off. "Wow, you really showed them. Good for you." As the wedding drew closer, excitement and stress filled my life. My sportswear brand, built from scratch, was finally taking off. Seeing my designs worn and loved was thrilling, and I had accumulated a small capital to expand and take on bigger challenges. Regarding the wedding, I envisioned something simple and intimate, but Jack dreamed of a lavish celebration. "Eliza, we're only doing this once. Let's make it big," he'd say with that persuasive grin of his. Reluctantly, I agreed, and we planned a grand event. I found myself negotiating deals and discounts wherever possible to manage the expenses. The wedding day appeared perfect on the surface. Our guests seemed to enjoy themselves, and Jack and I were caught up in a bubble of joy. However, not everyone shared our enthusiasm. Throughout the evening, I noticed Jack's parents whispering disapprovingly, their faces pinched with disapproval. His mother, ever the social butterfly, dropped hints to relatives about her worries that I was after their family wealth. I overheard her commenting loudly about the extravagance of the event, expressing concerns about my understanding of money. After the wedding, things didn't settle down. Jack's mom posted on social media, lamenting that Jack had married someone like me, expressing her fear of losing her son to a woman she deemed unworthy. Reading those words hurt deeply, stirring frustration and sadness within me. I tried to discuss it with Jack. Your mom's posts, they're really harsh. Can you talk to them? They don't even know about the business, how well it's doing. Jack sighed, troubled. Eliza, I know it's tough, but let's not rock the boat, okay? My parents, it's just how they are. They'll come around. They just need time to see what I see. Despite my doubts, I agreed to let it go. Exhausted from the ongoing tension, I poured my energy into my business, something positive and wholly mine. Despite personal turmoil, my brand continued to grow. Orders poured in, and I gained a following, doing interviews, photo shoots, and discussing partnerships. The evening of the charity dinner arrived, held at a swanky hotel downtown. The event supported sports programs for kids and teenagers. As the main costume designer, I chose a blue and white theme that complemented the decor and showcased my latest sportswear pieces. Walking into the grand hall with Jack, surrounded by well-dressed guests and shimmering lights, I felt nervous yet determined. The excitement of seeing my designs showcased in a grand setting quickly soured when we spotted Jack's parents across the room. Their cold stares cut through the warmth of the bustling crowd. Jack noticed but said nothing, and their blatant disregard stunned me deeply. But I bit my lip and kept walking. As guests began to arrive, I circulated the room, chatting and networking. Jack was by my side, his usual charming self, but I could tell he was a bit overwhelmed by the scale of the event. You're really pulling out all the stops, huh? Jack commented as we watched the crowd from a distance. Go big or go home, right? I replied with a wink. Eliza, you've outdone yourself, a familiar voice said from behind me. Turning around, I saw a local sports celebrity who'd worn my designs before. These uniforms are fantastic. Thanks so much. Enjoy the evening. I smiled, handing them a business card. Let's catch up soon. The event was buzzing, the atmosphere electric with enthusiasm and goodwill. Then the moment of truth arrived. The host took to the stage to thank the sponsors, and my heart raced as he started to speak. We haven't been seated long when the evening's presenter took the stage to kick off the event. The atmosphere was lively, filled with applause and cheer, until it came time to thank the sponsors. My heart raced with pride and anxiety as my name was announced as one of the main contributors. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Eliza, whose generous donation of over $300,000 made tonight possible. The presenter boomed through the microphone. The room erupted in applause but was abruptly pierced by a shriek from Mrs. Thompson, Jack's mother. Absolutely not, she screamed, drawing the room into shocked silence. She demanded a microphone, and once it was handed to her, she didn't hesitate. This is preposterous. Eliza couldn't possibly afford this. She's nothing but a poor beggar using my son's money. She's a cunning predator sneaking into our family to bankrupt us. Her words echoed through the hall, venomous and loud. The presenter, taken aback but composed, quickly tried to correct the situation. Mrs. Thompson, I assure you, you are mistaken. Eliza's company is extremely successful and fully capable of such generosity. I know this firsthand. The crowd murmured, tension palpable. Then, in an unexpected move, the presenter passed the microphone to Jack, hoping for him to clear the air. Jack's face was a mix of embarrassment and conflict. He glanced at his parents, then at me, his voice barely a whisper as he spoke into the mic. I have nothing to say, he said, then walked over to his parents, leaving me standing alone amidst the sea of whispers. The weight of the moment settled heavy on my shoulders. I felt exposed and humiliated, not just by the accusations, but by Jack's refusal to defend me or affirm the truth about my success. The pride I had felt in my contribution was tarnished, overshadowed by the drama unfolding around me. Stepping into the spotlight, I approached the microphone. my heart pounding but my resolve clear. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I began, my voice steady despite the tumult of emotions. Tonight, I'd like to share something very personal about my journey. The room fell silent, all attention on me. I started as a street entrepreneur, driven not just to make ends meet but by a dream. That dream led to the creation of a sportswear brand that many of you know now. Pausing, I looked around, meeting the eyes of young athletes and seasoned businessmen alike. When my company's profits hit $500,000, I fulfilled a promise to a very special person, my grandfather. He left a will stating that his inheritance would go to a relative who made their own success, reaching that exact figure in their business. Whispers filled the hall, and I took a moment to let that sink in. That inheritance has been used to fuel not just my personal growth, but to give back through charity, much like tonight's event. I continued. The crowd was listening, some nodding as I unfolded more of my story. After the pandemic, my business didn't just survive, it thrived, growing several times over. Every challenge faced was a stepping stone. As I concluded, I stood before them not just as a business owner, but as someone who believed in the power of perseverance and dedication. The room erupted into applause, some guests standing in ovation. I scanned the crowd, seeing faces light up with respect and admiration. But my eyes briefly caught Jack's parents. Their expressions, once haughty, now showed disbelief and embarrassment. They quietly exited the hotel. Jack, looking equally shaken, tried to approach me, muttering an apology. Eliza, I just shook my head and walked past him, my emotions a mix of triumph and heartache. I needed space, not just from the evening's drama, but from everything. Deciding to stay at the hotel that night, along with my thoughts, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice was thick with emotion. Honey, I saw everything. I just want you to know how proud I am to see you stand up there, telling your story, reclaiming your truth. You're everything I hoped you'd be. After spending a night at the hotel to clear my head, I returned home. The place felt different, heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves held the tension from the last few months. Jack was there, waiting. As soon as he saw me, he tried to apologize again. Eliza, I'm so sorry about everything. Can we just forget all this and start over? He pleaded, his voice desperate. I shook my head, the decision heavy on my heart, but clear in my mind. Jack, I can't. I don't want to be with someone who can't stand up for me, who sides with his parents over his wife. It's not just about last night. This has been building for a long time, I continued. His face fell, and he reached out, but I stepped back. I'm filing for divorce, I said firmly. I didn't wait for his response. Gathering a few essentials, I left for my mother's house, the one I recently bought with the inheritance from my grandfather. It felt like a sanctuary. The divorce proceedings were straightforward, thanks to the prenup we had signed, and with no children to consider, it was over quickly. During that time, Jack's parents tried to intervene. They called repeatedly, trying to patch things up, not for my sake, but because their son's lifestyle had changed now that I was out of the picture. I blocked their numbers, not just to silence the constant ringing, but to cut off a past that was holding me back. From friends, I heard Jack started drinking, lost his job, and eventually his parents disowned him, not wanting to tarnish their reputation with his downward spiral. Despite everything, I never wished him ill, but I knew I needed to move on. Living at my mom's place gave me the peace I needed to think about my next steps. The business was still thriving, and I poured more of myself into it, not just to distract from the divorce, but to rebuild stronger foundations for my future. One evening, sitting in the garden my mom and I had started together, she turned to me, a soft smile on her face. You did the right thing, Eliza. It's tough, but you're tougher. And I'm here always. Thanks, Mom. I know it's just a lot to process, I replied, feeling the weight of her support. As long as you remember that you're not just surviving, you're building, learning, and growing. That's what matters, she said, squeezing my hand. She was right. The end of my marriage wasn't just an ending. It was a gateway to a new chapter, one where I could make decisions without second-guessing if someone had my back, one where I could stand on my own, not just as a successful businesswoman, but as a person reshaped by her experiences.